the thin veil of safety. What if I told you that the lock on your front door is nothing more than a polite suggestion? We live our lives tucked away behind a fragile reality, convinced that four walls and a deadbolt are enough to keep the world out. But safety is an illusion, a thin veil we drape over our eyes to keep the unspoken dread of the unknown at bay. Think about it. How many times have you ignored a small red flag? A floorboard creak you blamed on the house settling, or a shadow in the corner of your eye you dismissed as a trick of the light. It's the same way we treat our health. We feel a weird, nagging pain or endure the mental weight of stress. Yet we tell ourselves, I'll deal with it tomorrow. I used to be that person, procrastinating on the very things that kept me whole, until I discovered ZocDoc. It turned what I feared would be a headache into a painless process. Finding a specialist who actually listens shouldn't be a luxury, and with a few clicks, it wasn't. But while ZocDoc can help you find a doctor to fix a physical ailment, there are some scars, the ones born from pure, unadulterated terror that no professional can easily heal. I learned this the hard way. For years, I moved through life with the arrogant confidence of the untouched. That changed in the winter of 2025. A single weekend was all it took to shatter my perception of the world forever. I realized then that evil doesn't always wear a mask or lurk in the pitch-black basement of a horror movie. Sometimes, it stands right in front of you. It walks among the crowds. It shambles in broad daylight, hiding in plain sight while it picks its moment to strike. The events of that year left me with a permanent sense of urgency, a constant, low-level vibration of fear that I can never quite shake off. You see, when you finally realize that the predator isn't just a story told around a campfire, you stop ignoring the red flags. You start listening to the silence. It started with a simple trip to escape the noise of the world, a solo camping expedition into the deep, frozen heart of the wilderness. I thought I was alone until the snow started to speak. The frozen watcher. I trade the noise of the world for the heavy, frozen lungs of the Blackwood State Forest. The air here is a physical weight, cold enough to turn every breath into a jagged shard of glass. I push my old truck up a narrow, neglected trail that hasn't seen a tire tread since the first frost. The wheels crunch over packed snow, a rhythmic grinding that feels like the only sound left in the universe. My father used to tell me that deep snow is a predator's best friend, because it doesn't just sit there. It absorbs sound. It swallows screams, footsteps, and warnings alike, leaving you in a sound-absorbing silence that can drive a man mad if he sits in it long enough. I park at a small, forgotten pull-off and begin the hike. My dog, Roscoe, is a flurry of energy, his paws throwing up plumes of white powder as he darts between the ancient, skeletal trees. He's the reason I feel brave enough to do this. We reach a clearing 20 minutes later, a pristine circle of white surrounded by a wall of thick, dark pines. There isn't a single footprint, no deer tracks, no rabbit hops, just a blank, terrifyingly beautiful canvas of ice. I set up camp with practiced efficiency, staking the tent into the iron-hard ground. Roscoe wanders nearby, sniffing at the roots of a massive spruce. But as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, his mood shifts. The playfulness vanishes. He stands perfectly still, his ears swiveling toward the tree line. A low, vibrating growl begins in his chest, a sound he only makes when he senses something that shouldn't be there. I try to shake it off. "Just a deer, buddy," I mutter, though the silence of the woods suggests otherwise. I build a small fire, the orange flames licking at the gathering shadows. I eat quickly, the warmth of the meal doing little to thaw the sudden chill in my bones. Then, Roscoe goes from growling to a sharp, frantic bark. I stand up, reaching instinctively for the handgun holstered at my hip. I follow his gaze to the edge of the tree line. At first, I see nothing but the shifting geometry of the dark. Then, a shape coalesces. A man. He's standing just at the limit of the firelight, half merged with the tree-line shadow. He isn't wearing camping gear. He looks like he just stepped out of a nightmare, perfectly still, watching me with a fixity that makes my skin crawl. "Hey, you scared the hell out of me," I call out, my voice sounding thin and brittle in the vast quiet. Roscoe's losing his mind now, teeth bared. The figure doesn't flinch. He steps forward just enough for the dying embers to catch his face. His eyes are hollow, and his expression is a void. "What are you doing out here, this deep in the woods?" he asks. His voice isn't just unfriendly, it's dripping with a cold, predatory malice. I try to keep my voice steady, just getting some air. "Look, I should tell you, I'm armed. I don't want any trouble." A sound escapes him, a metallic laugh that feels completely wrong, like gears grinding together without oil. "Armed? And here I thought we could share some hospitality," he says, his tone mocking. He doesn't wait for a reply. He simply turns and melts back into the darkness, his footsteps vanishing instantly into the sound-absorbing snow. I don't stay by the fire. I douse the embers with snow, plunging the clearing into a terrifying, absolute blackness. I retreat into my tent, pulling Roscoe in with me. We are separated from the world by nothing but a thin nylon barrier. I lie there, staring at the ceiling of the tent, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then, I hear it. Crunch, pause, crunch. Slow, deliberate footsteps are circling the tent. They aren't the sounds of someone lost. They're the sounds of someone measuring the distance between themselves and their prey. I reach for my handgun, my hand shaking so violently the metal clatters against the floor. I find the hammer and pull it back. The sound of cocking the hammer is a deafening crack in the small space. Outside, the footsteps stop. They are right at the zipper. I can hear the shift of weight in the snow, the faint sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing, just inches from my head. I hold my breath, waiting for the nylon to rip, for a hand to reach through. I shout through the fabric, my voice cracking. "I have a gun. Leave now or I will fire." Silence. Seconds stretch into centuries. Then, the crunching resumes, moving away toward the trees, faster this time until it fades into nothing. I don't sleep. I sit there with Roscoe tucked against my side, the gun heavy in my lap, watching the gray dawn slowly bleed through the tent walls. As soon as there is enough light to see, I pack with trembling hands, not even bothering to fold the tent properly. We hike back to the truck in a blind panic, my eyes darting to every shadow, every hollow in the trees. I drive away and I never look back. I made a promise to myself that morning. I will never return to those woods again. The memory of that metallic laugh followed me all the way back to civilization, but I soon realized that isolation isn't the only place where the world feels wrong. I thought the city would be safer, a place where people and lights would act as a shield. I was wrong. I traded the frozen woods for the cobblestone streets of Charleston, thinking I could leave the shadows behind. But some shadows don't stay in the forest. Some shadows follow you into the light. The shambling groom. The memory of that metallic laugh followed me all the way back to civilization. But I soon realized that isolation isn't the only place where the world feels wrong. I thought the city would be safer, a place where people and lights would act as a shield. I was wrong. I traded the frozen woods for the cobblestone streets of Charleston, South Carolina, thinking I could leave the shadows behind. It was July 2025, and the city was thick with humid air and the joyous noise of the holiday weekend. I was staying with my friend Julian, a law student with a mind as sharp and logical as a razor. He lived in a historic house near the market, the kind with high ceilings and tall windows that look out over narrow, winding alleyways. On our first morning, we headed toward the docks. The area was bustling, a sea of tourists in sundresses and flip-flops. But then, I saw him, cutting through the crowd with an unsettling, shambling movement, was a man dressed in a pristine wedding suit. It was a brilliant, blinding white, complemented by a crisp black bow tie and dress shoes that looked like they had never touched a speck of dust. He had long, curly black hair that framed a face of tanned skin so smooth and static it looked like it was carved from wax. He didn't look like he belonged in the summer heat. He looked like he had been dropped into our reality from a different dimension. "Look at that guy," I whispered, grabbing Julian's arm. "Something's not right." Julian, ever the skeptic, just shrugged. Probably some performance artist, or a groom who got cold feet. But the man didn't move like a performer. He moved with a detached, rhythmic shamble, his eyes fixed on some point far beyond the horizon. We instinctively walked faster, putting distance between us and the white suit. We turned 3 corners, weaving through the dense market, and ended up blocks away on a completely different street. I looked across the intersection, and my heart nearly stopped. There he was, The same man, the same pristine white suit, the same shambling movement. There was no physical way he could have beaten us there. He would have had to sprint through a maze of buildings. Yet he wasn't sweating. He wasn't even breathing hard. He was just there. Julian stopped mid-sentence, his brow furrowing. That's the same guy. How? We didn't wait for an answer. We spent the rest of the day trying to convince ourselves it was a coincidence. Perhaps even twins playing a prank. But the logic felt hollow. By July 5th, the city was at its peak capacity. We decided to join a ghost tour, a fitting activity for the historic, haunted atmosphere of Charleston after sunset. The streets were packed with people moving in every direction, a chaotic river of humanity. As our group stood near a dimly lit square, a particular wave of people approached us. And right there, in the dead center of the crowd, was the shambling groom. It was a ghost tour anomaly that was far more terrifying than any story our guide was telling. What made it truly bone-chilling was the crowd's oblivious reaction. Two tourists were walking so close to him that their shoulders nearly brushed his white sleeve, yet they didn't even glance his way. It was as if he was invisible to everyone but us. As he passed, he turned his head with a slow, mechanical precision. For one single heartbeat, he made eye contact with me. His eyes weren't human. They were like two holes cut into the fabric of the world. Then, he continued forward, tied to the movement of the crowd without truly being part of it, eventually disappearing into an alleyway shadow. Julian was quiet for a long time after that. The skeptic was finally starting to crack. "I don't like this," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. We hurried back to the house, locking the heavy front door and retreating inside. Julian went upstairs to his room, while I settled onto the couch in the downstairs living room. I shut the blinds, but the tall windows still felt like vulnerable gaps in my armor. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake. It wasn't a loud noise, but a persistent, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the glass. I stayed frozen, my breath catching in my throat, before I slowly stood up and peeled back the edge of the blind just an inch. At the far end of the narrow alley outside, I saw the back of the pristine white wedding suit. He was turning the corner, but right before he vanished from sight, he paused. He looked back toward my window, a silhouette of white against the dark brick. The next morning, Julian was pale. He didn't even try to rationalize it anymore. We both knew that something had been following us, something that didn't play by the rules of our world. As I drove home to Florida on July 6th, the image of that waxen complexion and the shambling walk stayed burned into my mind. I thought that by leaving Charleston, I was leaving the horror behind. I thought that my own house, my boring and predictable routine, would be my sanctuary. But routine is just a shield, and shields can only hold for so long before they start to crack. I trade the haunted city for the quiet of my own home. But I soon realized that some monsters don't follow you home, they're already waiting for you inside. Story 3. The city felt haunted, but my own house became a tomb. Routine is a shield, until it starts to crack. I trade the haunted cobblestones of Charleston for the familiar walls of my small suburban home, convinced that my boring and predictable life will act as a sanctuary. I work from home, I go to the gym late at night to avoid the crowds, and I keep to myself. It is a quiet existence, the kind where you know the exact frequency of your refrigerator's hum. But that hum began to hide a much darker melody. It started on a Tuesday, at exactly 2:30 inches the morning. I was half asleep on the couch, the television casting a flickering blue light across the room, when I heard a soft, heavy thump near the back of the house. It wasn't loud, just enough to vibrate through the floorboards. I muted the TV, holding my breath, but the silence that followed was absolute. I told myself the house was just settling, a lie we all tell ourselves to avoid the terror of the alternative. I checked the back door, confirmed the deadbolt was engaged, and went to bed. The next morning, the reality of my sanctuary began to fray. When I went to let the fresh air in, the back door handle felt loose. It didn't just rattle. It felt as if someone had gripped it with immense force and tried to twist it clean off. I made a mental note to call a locksmith, but like my health, I put it off. On Thursday, the escalation turned personal. I woke up to my alarm and reached for my phone on the nightstand. It was at 12% battery. I distinctly remembered plugging it in. The cable was still attached to the phone, but the charger had been pulled out of the wall outlet. I searched for a rational explanation. Maybe I kicked it in my sleep, but the phone was still on the stand, not in the bed. Someone had stood over me while I slept and unplugged it. I stayed up late that night, sitting in the dark with the lights off, listening. Around 3 a.m., the slow thumps returned. They weren't house-settling noises. They were rhythmic, deliberate footsteps. I found muddy shoe prints near the back door the next morning. They were bizarre, blurred, and smeared as if someone had used a cloth to wipe them off as they walked, trying to hide the tread pattern. My stomach skipped a beat. This wasn't a random burglar. This was someone who knew how to hide. I saw faint scratch marks around the lock, evidence of a thin tool prying at the mechanism. I finally called the locksmith. He replaced the unit that afternoon and assured me I was safe. That night, I pushed a heavy kitchen chair under the handle and locked my bedroom door for the first time in years. Just before 4 a.m., I heard it. Not a knock, not a bang. It was the sound of fingertips tapping lightly, softly, on my bedroom door. It was the sound of someone testing the wood, feeling for a way in. I stayed completely still, staring at the door handle, my eyes burning because I refused to blink. The tapping lasted for a full minute before soft footsteps retreated down the hallway. The next morning, the chair was still under the handle, but the back door was wide open and unlocked. The new lock wasn't broken. It had been turned from the inside. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Someone hadn't been breaking in. They were already here. I called the police, but they found no forced entry. They suggested I might be sleepwalking, a patronizing explanation that made me want to scream. I knew the truth. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the kitchen with every light blazing and a serrated knife on the table. Around 2 a.m., the basement door just feet away from me creaked open. My heart didn't just race. It felt like it was trying to burst out of my chest. I walked toward the gap, peering through the sliver of darkness. Down on the bottommost steps, I saw the pale, unmoving outline of a person standing in the shadows, looking up. I didn't wait. I slammed the door, sprinted to my car, and dialed 911. When the police arrived this time, they didn't suggest sleepwalking. They entered the house with guns drawn and dragged him out in handcuffs. He was a barefoot man in dark, filthy clothes that looked like they had been slept in for weeks. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me. The lead officer came out later, his face grim. He told me they found food wrappers and bottled water tucked behind the basement furnace. There was a phone charger plugged into a hidden outlet down there, and a pile of old insulation used as a bed. He had been living beneath my feet for at least a week, watching my routine, learning when I went to the gym and coming up into my space while I was gone, or worse, while I was home. But the true nightmare was found days later in my camera roll. As I was scrolling through photos to send to a friend, I stopped at a thumbnail I didn't recognize. I opened it and felt the air leave my lungs. It was a picture of me, taken at 3:11 a.m. on the night my phone was unplugged. It was a close-up of my face as I lay in bed, fast asleep. The intruder hadn't just been in my house. He had been inches from my face, documenting my vulnerability. The police added stalking and felony invasion charges to his file, and he will likely be registered as a sex offender for life. They took him away, but they couldn't take away the memory. Every time a floorboard creaks now, I don't think about the house settling. I think about the man behind the furnace. I haven't slept in the dark since that night, and the trauma of that 3:11 a.m. photo is a permanent scar on my soul. Safety is just a story we tell ourselves to keep the shadows at bay. But some shadows have faces. They took him away, but the arrest is not the end. The trauma lingers in every creak of the wood, a silent reminder that the veil is thinner than we ever dared to imagine. Good night, and please, keep the lights on. They took him away, but they couldn't take away the memory. The handcuffs clicked shut. The sirens faded into the distance, and the basement was finally empty. Yet the silence left behind is heavier than the dread that preceded it. I am forever changed. My home, once a sanctuary of predictable routines, is now a place where I count the floorboards and check the deadbolts 4 times before I even think about closing my eyes. Even then, Sleep is a battle I usually lose. And the long-term psychological impact of these encounters isn't something that fades with a sunrise. I can no longer step into a basement without my pulse skyrocketing. And the idea of solo camping, of being separated from the world by nothing but a thin sheet of nylon, is a chapter of my life that is permanently closed. I look over my shoulder in every crowded market, half expecting to see a pristine white wedding suit shambling toward me through the masses. That man in Charleston remains an unresolved mystery, a glitch in reality that defies every logical explanation my friend Julian tried to provide. He felt real and unreal at the same time, a ghost in broad daylight that chose to let me see him. But the most intrusive trauma is the digital scar left on my phone. I eventually had to delete that 3:11 a.m. photo, but the image is burned into my retinas. I can still see the angle of the shot, the graininess of the low light, and the horrifying realization of how close he was. It is a reminder that creeps like that really make life scary, and the moment you let your guard down is the moment you become a character in someone else's dark fantasy. The 5-second warning. Everything you know about small-town safety is a lie designed to keep you quiet. We grow up believing that the picket fences and the familiar waves from neighbors are a shield against the depravity of the outside world. But I'm here to tell you that sometimes the fence is just there to keep the witnesses from running. People think the monster is always the stranger lurking in the woods. Yet in my experience, the real threat is often the person who's lived next door to you for 40 years. It only takes 5 seconds to realize your life is in danger. But it takes a lifetime to process the fact that the person everyone warned you about was actually the only one trying to save you. 20 years ago, I fled Wyoming. I didn't just move away. I vanished. I left because of a secret my mother kept buried under the floorboards of our home in Medicine Bow, a place where the wind howls through the gravel and the trees look like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. They tell you that small towns are safe because everyone knows your name, but that's exactly what makes them terrifying. There is nowhere to hide when the eyes watching you from across the street know exactly who you are, where you sleep, and whose trash you've been sifting through. It's an illusion, a fragile veneer of peace that shatters the moment you see something you weren't meant to see. If you don't pay attention to these stories, you might miss the warning signs sitting right in your own backyard. You see, the most dangerous man in my hometown wasn't the one the parents whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. He wasn't the monster the local legends were built around. In reality, the man we were told to fear was the only human being with enough soul left to stand between a child and a pack of predators. The person we called a hero, he was the one holding the knife. I remember the weight of the silence in Medicine Bow. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, like the air before a massive storm. Every time I walked past the edge of town, I felt the prickle of eyes on the back of my neck. We were raised on rules: never stay out past dark, never talk to strangers, and above all, never go near the rusted trailer of old Bob Barnes. We were told he had killed a boy in cold blood, that he was a relic of a war that had stripped him of his humanity. We believed it. Why wouldn't we? It was the story the town needed, so they didn't have to look at the rot in their own homes. The urgency I feel now isn't for myself. I'm long gone, but for anyone still living in a place where neighborly is a mask for complicit. Human depravity doesn't always look like a slasher movie. Sometimes it looks like a Friday night football game or a quiet afternoon by the lake. It's the split second where you see a figure carrying something heavy over their shoulder into the shrubs and you choose to look away. I chose to look closer, and that's why I can never go back. I want you to imagine for a moment that your entire reality is a stage play. Everyone has their lines, everyone knows their roles, and as long as you play along, the lights stay on. But what happens when you step out of character? What happens when you realize the boogeyman is the only one trying to stop the play from turning into a massacre? It's a paradox that keeps me awake at night, even 2 decades later. The truth doesn't set you free in a small town. It makes you a target. I was 17 when the mask finally slipped. Up until that point, old Bob was the devil incarnate to me. My mother had told me stories of how he had murdered her high school friend, a boy who was supposedly a saint. I grew up hating a man I had never spoken to, fueled by the tears of a woman I trusted more than anyone. I thought I was being a protector, a local vigilante ready to rid the town of its shadow. I didn't realize I was actually a pawn in a much darker game, one where the victims are silenced by the very people who claim to mourn them. The illusion of safety is a lie. and the cost of that lie is often measured in lives. We like to think we are different, that our communities are built on stronger foundations. But ash looks the same no matter where it falls. Whether it's a cornfield in Iowa or a schoolhouse in Pennsylvania, the darkness is the same. It's a man-made evolution of evil that feeds on the silence of the good people. Only by recognizing the warning signs can we hope to escape the same fate as those who stayed behind. Let me take you back to where the dust never settles. It started in a trailer at the edge of town, where I stood with a can of paint thinner and a heart full of righteous fury, ready to burn down a man's life without knowing that I was the one standing in the dark. The ghost of Medicine Bow. I stood in the shadow of Bob Barnes's rusted trailer, the night air of Medicine Bow pressing against my skin like a damp shroud. In my hand, the plastic handle of a stolen container of paint thinner bit into my palm, a chemical weight that promised to erase the nightmare the town had been feeding me for years. It started here, in this pocket of Wyoming where the dust never seems to settle and the past is just a skeleton waiting to be unearthed. Growing up in a place like this, you're raised on stories. Most of them are about Butch Cassidy or the prehistoric bones sitting in the Natural History Museum in Pittsburgh. But the story that mattered most, the one that defined my teenage years, was the myth of the monster at the edge of town. Old Bob Barnes. Have you ever lived in a place where a single name could make the temperature drop 10 degrees? That was Bob for us. To the local kids, he wasn't just a man. He was a living ghost story, a warning carved into the gravel of our streets. Everyone knew the legend, or at least the version that kept the town's conscience clean. Bob was the local pariah, a Vietnam vet who came home with too many ghosts and a penchant for sifting through other people's trash under the cover of darkness. My mother, a woman whose vocabulary rarely included the word strict, had one non-negotiable rule: stay away from Bob. She told me he had murdered a close friend of hers back in high school, a boy who was full of life and promise. According to her, Bob was a heartless predator who had snatched away a young man's future and escaped justice on a technicality. This wasn't just a story. It was an open wound that shaped my reality. To me, Bob wasn't a man. He was a stain on our town that needed to be scrubbed away. I want you to think about that for a second. Imagine being told since you were 5 years old that a child killer lived just 3 blocks away and the police did nothing. It festers. It turns into a dark kind of courage. The plan was simple. Fueled by the reckless arrogance of a 17-year-old boy, I was going to be the hero. I was going to do what the law couldn't. I spent a week siphoning gas and finally settled on stealing a can of paint thinner from the school's art supply closet. It felt poetic, in a twisted way, using something meant for creation to destroy a monster. I crept through the tall, dry grass near East Allen Lake, the scent of the paint thinner leaking from the cap, sharp and metallic, burning my nostrils. I could see the dim glow of a television through Bob's window. I waited until the light died, until the world was nothing but the sound of crickets and my own racing heart. I moved toward the trailer, my fingers fumbling with the lid of the container. I was ready to strike a match for justice. If you're enjoying this dive into the dark heart of small town secrets, make sure to hit that like button and share your own local urban legends in the comments. We all have one, don't we? Then, the world shattered. A sharp, mechanical click echoed from my right, a sound I recognized instantly. The cold, unyielding press of steel touched the back of my head. "What you got there, boy?" The voice was gravelly, devoid of the malice I expected, but laden with a terrifying authority. I froze. My knees shook so violently I thought I'd collapse right onto my puddle of accelerant. I waited for the muzzle flash. I waited for the darkness to take me. But instead of a bullet, there was a shove. Bob spun me around, his flashlight blinding me. When he saw my face, his posture changed. He didn't look like a murderer. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had been expecting this for 20 years. He lowered the gun and said my name. He knew who I was. He knew my mother. He knew my birthday. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. But not because of the gun. It was because the monster knew my soul. I wondered how long it'd be before he showed up, he muttered, gesturing toward the door of his trailer with the barrel of his .22. My mind was a chaotic mess of fear and confusion. He invited me inside, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the myth. The trailer was cramped, smelling of stale tobacco, old newspapers, and something metallic. But it wasn't a dungeon. It was a hermitage. He sat me down on a faded vinyl chair and asked what my mother had told me. I spat out the story of the murder, the hero friend she had lost, and the monster who had taken him. I wanted him to be angry. I wanted him to roar so I could justify my hatred. But Bob didn't get angry. He just smiled a sad, crooked smile and said, "Kid, that's not how it happened. Not even close. You've been fed a lie to protect the people who really deserve that paint thinner." He began to describe a night at the lake decades ago. He had been out hunting squirrels, a habit that kept him away from the townspeople who already looked at him sideways. It was a full moon, clear as day. He saw a group of drunk teenagers, including my mother's saintly friend. In the moonlight, he realized the lead boy was carrying something. A small child, unconscious and limp, her long hair shining like silver in the dark. Bob followed them, watching from the brush, until he heard them talking about what they were going to do to her. It was sick. It was depraved. When Bob stepped out and ordered them to drop the girl, my mother's friend didn't run. He pulled a knife and moved to kill the child rather than get caught. Bob did the only thing a soldier knows how to do when an innocent life is on the line. He put 2 rounds into the boy's chest before the blade could strike home. As Bob spoke, the air in the trailer felt thin, suffocating. He described carrying the girl into town, leaving her at a gas station, and turning himself in the next morning. The cops let him go because his story checked out. The girl's parents were just happy to have her home, even if she later died from the massive dose of tranquilizers those boys had forced into her system. Bob had spent 20 years as the town's villain because the respectable families couldn't handle the truth about their own sons. They needed a scapegoat, and the quiet veteran with PTSD was the perfect fit. He stayed away from town, not out of guilt, but out of a deep-seated disgust for the people who let the real monsters walk free. He looked me dead in the eye and told me to go home and ask my mother one question. Is it true? He didn't ask for an apology. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just wanted the truth to finally land where it belonged. I left the trailer with my head spinning, the container of paint thinner forgotten in the dirt like a discarded toy. The walk home felt like a mile through broken glass. When I got home, my mother was in the kitchen, nursing a wine cooler and looking at old high school photos. I didn't ease into it. I told her what Bob had said. I described the lake, the knife, and the unconscious girl. The color drained from her face so fast it was like watching a ghost manifest in real time. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. In that moment, the woman I thought was a victim became someone I didn't recognize. A person who had chosen a lie to protect the memory of a predator, even if it meant vilifying an innocent man for a lifetime. She looked at me and said, "You weren't supposed to know." That was it. No defense, no regret. Just the cold realization that her image was more important than the truth. Our relationship never recovered. The betrayal wasn't just hers. It belonged to the whole town. Every friendly wave from a neighbor now felt like a hidden threat, a mask for a collective rot that preferred a convenient monster over a difficult truth. If you've ever felt like your entire life was a staged performance, you know exactly how I felt. Medicine Bow wasn't a sanctuary. It was a graveyard of secrets, and I was done being one of the mourners. I packed my bags and left Wyoming shortly after, vowing never to return to the place of my birth. The ghost of Medicine Bow wasn't Bob Barnes. It was the truth that everyone was too afraid to acknowledge. I haven't seen my mother in 20 years, and honestly, it's the best decision I ever made. Don't let the picket fences fool you. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who tell the best stories. But Wyoming isn't the only place where the soil hides secrets. And sometimes, the most peaceful landscapes are the ones where the fire has already consumed everything. That realization stayed with me all the way to the silent, ash-covered horizons of the Midwest, where the cornfields don't just grow, they hide things. Things that make Medicine Bow look like a playground. The well in the ash. That was the last time I called her Mom. The bridge was burned, the history rewritten in ash and betrayal, and I had to get away before the smoke choked the life out of me. But Wyoming isn't the only place where the soil hides secrets. Sometimes, You trade the mountains for the plains, thinking the flat horizon will offer more clarity, only to find that the vast emptiness of the Midwest is just a larger canvas for the same human darkness. In 2002, my boyfriend and I were driving from Chicago toward Vermillion, South Dakota. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, a break from the noise of the city. We were cruising through the endless Iowa cornfields, that rhythmic green wall that usually makes you feel safe, tucked away from the rest of the world. But then, the world stopped being green. It was like crossing an invisible border into a dead dimension. One second we were surrounded by towering stalks of corn, and the next, they just vanished. In their place was a landscape of ash and charcoal, miles upon miles of blackened earth, smoking and charred, stretching out toward a horizon that looked like a smudge of lead against a gray sky. My boyfriend, always the pragmatist, tried to calm me down. He said it was normal, that farmers often burn their fields to prepare for the next cycle. But normal people don't find comfort in a graveyard of crops. The visual contrast was jarring. The sky felt too big, the ground too dark, and the visibility, which had been limited to just a few feet, suddenly opened up for miles. That was the only reason it was so easy to spot them. Two figures were walking through the burned-out field, hand in hand. From a distance, it looked like a scene from a vintage postcard. A wholesome old-timer taking his grandson out for a morning stroll to show him the aftermath of the fire. But the closer we got, the more the Hallmark card began to rot. We were listening to music, lost in a comfortable silence, when I saw them reach the edge of an old, stone-rimmed well. I watched in perfect detail as we zoomed closer. The old man was wearing faded dungarees, his dark hair thinning on top. The little boy was small, maybe 5 or 6, wearing a bright blue shirt and white sneakers that looked blindingly clean against the black ash. He had curly, white blonde hair that caught what little light was left in the sky. Then, without a word, without a struggle, the old man picked the boy up and tossed him down the well. I screamed. I yelled, "Oh my God!" so loud my boyfriend nearly swerved off the road. He was zoned out, eyes glued to the asphalt, and he hadn't seen a thing. I was frantically digging through my bag for my cell phone, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the zipper. For a split second, I thought about telling him to stop the car, but a terrifying image flashed in my brain, the two of us lying dead in that field of ash, riddled with gunshot wounds from a man who had just discarded a child like trash. "Keep driving," I shouted. "Keep driving, but call 911. A kid was just thrown down a well." He was confused, asking what the hell I was talking about, but the terror in my voice finally registered. I found my phone, but when I flipped it open, I saw exactly 0 bars. In the middle of those charred fields, we were digitally stranded. I grabbed the paper map, searching for the nearest town, and saw a speck of a place just a few miles down the highway. I told him to put his foot down. We rolled into town like a rally car, pulling into the parking lot of a small, weathered diner called Al's Kitchen. I nearly fell out of the car before it even stopped, rushing through the front doors. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of grease and the heavy silence of a small town at midday. Every head in the place spun around as I ran to the counter and begged for a phone. The lady behind the register gave me a slow, cautious nod and pushed the handset toward me. As I described the scene to the 911 dispatcher, the entire diner went quiet, and you could hear a pin drop. When I mentioned the well and the little boy, a collective gasp rippled through the room. I was shaking with adrenaline, my heart hammering against my ribs. After I hung up, the silence didn't break. It just got heavier. Every single person was staring at me, not with sympathy, but with a strange, guarded suspicion. A man got up from a booth and approached us, introducing himself as a local. He started asking about the fields we saw, and when I mentioned the charred miles, he turned to the other diners. "Must be Art Landry's place," he said. He asked me to describe the man. I told him, dungarees, thinning dark hair, older. Everyone agreed it had to be Art. They said his grandkids were staying with him while their parents were away. They looked shocked, but they also looked defensive. It was that small-town wall of silence, the kind that prioritizes one of our own over a stranger's testimony. They asked me a dozen times if I was sure. It was an optical illusion, one man suggested. The smoke tricks the eyes. I told them I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. By the time the deputy arrived, I was practically vibrating with frustration. We went out to the parking lot to talk away from the crowd, and I repeated the story for the fourth time. The deputy gave me the same look, the "are you crazy" look. Then the county sheriff rolled in, having driven all the way from headquarters. He listened to the deputy's summary and did a long, drawn-out, "Huh, really?" He walked off to talk on his radio, and when he came back, he said they'd called Art Landry personally. "Art says he doesn't know what you're talking about," the sheriff said, his tone bordering on condescending. "He says him and his grandson haven't been near those fields all day." I was begging him at that point. I told him the kid would drown if there was water, or die from the fall if it was dry. I was animated, desperate. And the more I pushed, the more the sheriff and his deputies looked at me like I was a public nuisance. Finally, after I literally begged, he sent a deputy out to check the well. We waited in that dusty parking lot for what felt like hours. My boyfriend kept trying to comfort me, saying everything would be fine, but I could feel the gaslighting settling in. The sheriff eventually walked back over with a smug grin. "Good news," he said. "The well is empty, and Art is heading down here now with the boy so you can see for yourself." I was speechless. I knew what I saw. A few minutes later, a beat-up old truck pulled in. Out stepped a big man in dungarees with dark, thinning hair. He looked furious. "Who's the one saying, 'I dropped my damn grandson down a well'?" he barked. The sheriff tried to play peacemaker, but Landry walked to the passenger side and helped a young boy out. He led the kid over to us and shoved him forward. "This the boy you saw?" My boyfriend sighed with relief. "See? I told you." But my blood went cold. The boy Landry was holding had dark hair, cut close to the scalp. He was wearing different clothes. "He wasn't the boy from the well." "That's not him," I said, my voice cracking. "The kid I saw had blonde hair. White blonde, curly hair. This isn't the same kid." The deputy laughed. Maybe the sun caught his hair, made it look blonde. The gaslighting was complete. They were trying to make me feel insane, but the visual contrast in my memory was too sharp to blur. I asked if there was someone else I could talk to. Someone who wasn't a friend of Art Landry. That was the breaking point. The sheriff took my boyfriend aside, and when they came back, my boyfriend's face was pale. "We need to leave," he whispered. "The sheriff told us to get out of town immediately or face charges for public disturbance. They wouldn't have people dirtying a good man's name." As we drove away, I felt a horrible, creeping sensation that I had just witnessed a murder and the entire town had helped cover it up. I called the Iowa State Patrol the second I had reception, but they eventually got back to me saying there was nothing to report. They protected their own. They chose the illusion of a peaceful town over the life of a blonde boy in a blue shirt. They called it an optical illusion, a trick of the light. But I know better. Sometimes the law isn't there to protect you. It's there to protect the people who control the land. They warned me to leave, but they couldn't make me forget. Because the person you trust the most might be the one you know the least. And in places where the corn is burned to ash, sometimes the people are too. They think they cleared Art Landry's name, but all they did was confirm that some secrets are too deep even for a well to hide. But if you think a small town cover-up is the worst thing that can happen when the authorities turn against you, you haven't seen what happens when your own face becomes a weapon used by the police in a place where you have no voice at all. The mirror image. I went looking for my roots and found a nightmare instead. You see, identity isn't always about a face. Sometimes it's about a stack of bodies you never touched. My father worked for the Foreign Office, and he met my mother while stationed in Peru. Her heritage was the heartbeat of our home. The spicy aroma of lomo saltado and the rhythmic pulse of Andean music were the background noise of my youth. In my late 20s, I finally decided to fly over, explore my mother country, and reconnect with relatives I'd only seen in grainy photos. Have you ever felt that pull? That deep, ancestral tug to see the place where your blood comes from? I was driving down a dusty, isolated back road, lost in the rugged beauty of the landscape and trying to find a tiny village where my cousins lived, when the tranquility was obliterated. Flashing lights erupted in my rearview mirror. A Peruvian police cruiser was tailing me, sirens wailing like a wounded animal. I pulled over immediately, my mind racing through my rusty Spanish, preparing to explain that I was just a lost tourist. But this wasn't a routine traffic stop. Instead of the slow, methodical approach you see in movies, the officer leaped out of his car and took a defensive stance behind his open door. He aimed his weapon directly at my windshield and began screaming over a loudspeaker, commanding me to thrust my hands out the window. If you think your heart can't beat out of your chest, try staring down the barrel of a service pistol in the middle of nowhere. I was absolutely terrified. I'm from a place where you barely see a gun in real life, let alone have one leveled at your head by a man whose finger is visibly trembling on the trigger. As I shouted that I was unarmed, the officer approached with a brutality that felt personal. He shoved the cold barrel of his pistol against my temple, the metal biting into my skin, and began barking accusations I could barely understand. Words like murderer and violator cut through the air. He tried to cuff me one-handed while keeping the gun pressed to my skull. One slip, one accidental twitch, and my brains were going to decorate the passenger seat. I could smell the gun oil and the sweat on his uniform. It was the smell of impending death. More cruisers screamed onto the scene, dust billowing as they surrounded my car like sharks circling a kill. I was dragged out, my face pressed into the dirt, tasting the grit of the Peruvian highlands. I was hauled off to a local jail cell that felt like a stone tomb. Being in that cell was the single lowest point of my life. The language barrier became a wall of glass. I could see their hatred, but I couldn't shatter their assumptions. One officer actually gasped and whispered, "That's him," as I was led through the station. I was having waking nightmares about being disappeared in a foreign country for a crime I didn't commit. Every time a guard walked by, they would jeer at me through the bars, telling me to shut my mouth before they shut it for me. I kept telling them I was British, a tourist, a nobody. They just laughed. This went on for hours. I sat on a cold, damp bench, listening to the incessant drip of a leaky pipe that sounded like a ticking clock. Convinced my life was over, I thought about my mother, about the food she cooked, and how I might never taste it again because of a cosmic fluke. Then, out of the blue, the cell door swung open with a rusty groan. An officer stood there, looking suddenly embarrassed, his previous bravado replaced by a sheepish twitch of his mustache. He told me there had been a mistake. I was free to go. The transition was surreal. One minute I was a monster. The next I was just a nuisance they wanted to get rid of. The police were suddenly a mix of nervous laughter and apologies that didn't even begin to cover the trauma of the last few hours. They acted like they'd ticketed the wrong car, not dragged a man into a cage at gunpoint. Before I left, they showed me a picture of the man they had confused me with. He was a violent, wanted criminal, a truly dangerous individual whose crimes were enough to make your stomach turn. Horrible things involving children and unmentionable violence. When I looked at the photo, my heart stopped. It was like staring into a mirror. Every feature, the shape of the nose, the set of the eyes, the slight arch of the left eyebrow, even the hairline was a perfect match. I was looking at my doppelganger, a man who shared my face but possessed the soul of a demon. It was a haunting realization. Somewhere in this country, a man who looked exactly like me was committing atrocities, and my face was the reason I was almost executed. I eventually made it to my relative's house, shaking like a leaf. I couldn't even hold a glass of water without spilling it. When I told them what had happened and asked if I was entitled to any kind of compensation for the psychological horror I'd endured, they actually laughed. "No chance," they said, between bites of dinner. "In Peru. You're just lucky you're still breathing." I had an amazing time with my family after that, and I don't regret the trip because it taught me that safety is a fragile luxury. But I haven't been back to Peru since. Next time, I'm getting my family to pick me up from the bloody airport. If you've ever experienced the sheer terror of being judged for something you didn't do, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been mistaken for someone else? It makes you question who you really are when the world sees a killer in your reflection. This experience changed me. It made me realize that our identities are not our own. They are whatever the person with the gun decides they are. You need to be careful, even when you're just trying to find your roots. Don't assume that because you're innocent, you're safe. Sometimes, the universe just hands you a face that's already been marked for death. I was looking into a mirror, but the man staring back was a murderer. But identity isn't always about a face. Sometimes it's about a stack of bodies. And as I discovered later, some killers don't need a mirror to see a monster. They just need a quiet Sunday in a grocery store. If you think being arrested for someone else's crime is bad, imagine being a witness to a crime so calculated that the killer treats human beings like inventory. I thought I'd seen the worst of humanity in that Peruvian cell, but I was wrong. The real horror wasn't a mistake of identity. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded act of restructuring reality. It happened in a place called Windsor, and it started with a routine Sunday shift that turned into a ritual of slaughter. The terror I felt in Peru was nothing compared to the absolute coldness I saw in the eyes of a man who decided that victims should be stacked before they are broken. The stack at Bilo. Windsor was a town of 2,000 people. On June 6th, 1993, it became a tomb. I spent years wearing the badge of a deputy, and most Sundays in Bertie County are a slow crawl of paperwork and mild traffic disputes. The kind of days where the biggest excitement is a escaped cow or a broken down tractor on the highway. But 1993 was the year all that peace shattered. It was a humid evening when the radio crackled with a code that makes your blood run cold. Multiple deaths. There's a specific kind of silence that follows a call like that. A split second where you refuse to believe your ears before the adrenaline forces your boots toward the cruiser. I followed the rough convoy toward the north side of town, where the Bilo grocery store stood, a place that was usually the heartbeat of our community, a spot where neighbors swapped gossip over produce. We found the first signs of the horror before we even crossed the threshold. A trail of blood, thick and dark, smeared across the glass panels of the front entrance. It looked like someone had tried to paint a warning in despair. It belonged to a member of the cleaning crew who had managed to crawl from the back of the store toward the phone, desperate to reach the world outside before the light faded from his eyes. Inside, the store was eerily quiet, the sterile smell of fresh floor wax mixing with the heavy, metallic tang of fresh blood. We spread out, clearing aisle after aisle, our service weapons drawn and hearts hammering against our ribs, expecting an ambush from the shadows of the cereal boxes or the frozen food section. Instead, we found a scene that looked like a ritual of pure, unadulterated malice. 6 people had been rounded up at the back of the store. 3 were already dead. 2 were clinging to life by a thread. The survivor's account was a window into a nightmare that no training manual could prepare us for. He told us how a man had stepped out of the aisles just as the store was closing, holding a gun to the clerk's face with a calmness that was more terrifying than rage. He didn't just want the cash from the office. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted to break them. The killer forced the victims to tie each other up using dog leashes he'd grabbed from the pet supply aisle. Think about that, the utter humiliation and terror of being bound with a leash while a man watches you with cold hazel eyes and a crooked nose. But it was the stacking that proved he wasn't just a robber. He wasn't even a man anymore. He ordered them to lie on top of each other in pairs, creating human layers, a sandwich of flesh and fear. He stood over them and whispered a prayer. God, forgive me for what I'm about to do. And then he started shooting into the stacks. It was mechanical, cold. When his gun jammed or ran dry of ammunition, he didn't stop. He didn't flee. He ran back into the aisles to grab a knife. The survivor watched as the killer returned, looked him dead in the eye, and asked a single, chilling question. Will you identify me? It was a test of life and death. A game played by a predator who felt untouchable. The survivor begged for mercy, his voice cracking as he promised silence. But the man turned his fury on the brother stacked on top. He didn't just stab him. He drove the blade into the man's back with such savage force that the knife blade broke off inside the body. The cruelty was calculated, designed to leave a mark that went deeper than the skin. The investigation that followed was a masterclass in frustration and systemic failure. The Bilo security system, the one thing that could have given us a face to haunt, had been scheduled for repairs that very week. The timing was too perfect, too haunting. It felt like the universe was conspiring with the killer. We circulated sketches based on the survivors' descriptions, looking for that crooked nose and those hazel eyes in every face we passed. We tracked a white sedan with Maryland tags that had been seen speeding toward Highway 17, but the owner was eventually cleared. Every lead turned into a dead end. Every tip evaporated like mist in the Carolina heat. The killer had claimed to be a former cop, someone who knew the layout, the timing of the weekend cash drop, and exactly how to manipulate the scene. We checked every fingerprint, every military discharge, every law enforcement termination in the tri-state area. Nothing. It was like hunting a ghost who knew our own playbook better than we did. I still sit at my desk sometimes, late into the night when the station is quiet, and look at those old, yellowing files. Why did he let one live? Some say he simply got tired of the blood, that the act of murder had lost its luster. But I think he left a witness on purpose. I think he wanted the story of the stacks to be told. He wanted the town of Windsor to know exactly how powerless we were that Sunday. He walked away with a few $1,000s and disappeared into the night, leaving us with a mystery that rots the soul. He left Windsor with a scar that 200 years of history won't heal. Evil doesn't always have a crooked nose and hazel eyes. Sometimes it's just the man who knows exactly how to stack his victims to ensure the trauma never ends. If you're listening to this and it's making your skin crawl, you need to understand that this isn't just a story from the past. These people are still out there. This killer, if he's still breathing, is walking among us, perhaps in another small town, watching another grocery store close. You have to stay vigilant. Don't assume your town is too small for this kind of darkness. Hit that like button if you want more of these deep dives into the cases they couldn't solve. And comment, never forget to honor the victims of Windsor. We owe it to them to keep the lights on. Share this video immediately, literally right now, because the more people who know the details of the Below stacker, the less chance he has of staying in the shadows. If you have any information, even a small detail about a white sedan or a man with a crooked nose from that era, reach out to your local authorities. Don't wait. Justice doesn't have an expiration date, but our safety might. The schoolhouse in Nickel Mines was eventually torn down, just like the Below store changed hands. But the narrator's anger remained, leading back to the original question of who we can really trust. Because in places like Windsor, you realize that the most dangerous individuals aren't always strangers coming from the city. They are the ones who know exactly when the cameras are turned off and which dog leashes are strong enough to hold a human being. It's the milkman, the neighbor, the former cop you see at the diner. The trauma doesn't just go away when the crime scene tape is taken down. It stays in the soil. Stay with me. Because in Bart Township, we live like aliens in our own country. And the blood turned the fields red long before the milkman ever made his final, murderous delivery. You think you know your neighbors? Think again. The story of what happened in that Amish schoolhouse will change the way you look at a glass of milk forever. The milkman's note, they forgave him. I left. Because sometimes the hands of God feel very cold, especially when they're used to pat the back of a man who turned a sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. I grew up in Bart Township, Pennsylvania, a place so quiet you can hear the corn grow. Specifically, I was raised in Nickel Mines, home to the old order Amish. If you're picturing the tourist Amish who use cell phones for business, think again. These people were hardcore. They referred to anyone outside their faith as English, and growing up there felt like being an alien in your own country. But it was a peaceful existence, right up until October 2nd, 2006. That morning started like any other on the farm. I had dropped out of school after 8th grade to help my father, as is our custom. We were out in the fields when my dad suddenly stopped, squinting at a figure in the distance. "Is that your brother?" he asked, his voice laced with a confusion that quickly turned to alarm. It was only 11 a.m. My little brother was sprinting down the lane toward the farmhouse, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. When he finally reached us, he couldn't even speak at first. He just sobbed, clutching my mother's apron. When the words finally came out, they stopped time. "There's a man in our classroom," he gasped. "He has a gun, and he has chains and hooks." That was the red mist. My father grabbed his own gun and ran toward the old schoolhouse, screaming at me to stay back and protect my mother. We waited for hours, the air thick with a dread that felt physical. When my father finally returned, he looked like a man who had seen the bottom of hell. The story he told was a descent into madness. Around 10:30 a.m., a local milk tank driver named Charlie Roberts, a man who had visited our farm dozens of times, parked his pickup in front of the West Nickel Mine School. He walked inside with a ruse about a missing clevis pin, a common farming bolt used to hitch implements to tractors. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a neighbor in need. But when the teacher couldn't find the pin, the mask slipped. Roberts returned from his truck not with a bolt, but with a 9mm handgun. He wasn't there for the school's petty cash. He ordered the young boys, including my terrified brother, to help him unload a nightmare from the bed of his truck. They carried in a horrifying inventory: a shotgun, a stun gun, lumber, nails, wires, and a bag full of metal eye hooks. He intended to turn that one-room schoolhouse into a fortified torture chamber. Imagine the psychological scar on those boys, being forced to carry the very tools meant for their sister's execution. The teacher managed to flee and call 911 from a neighbor's house, but Roberts was already hammering the lumber across the doors, nails screeching into the wood to seal the trap. He eventually allowed the boys and the pregnant women to leave, but he kept the girls. He made them line up against the chalkboard, their small shadows stretching across the floor. When the state troopers surrounded the building, Roberts called 911 himself, cold as ice, threatening to execute everyone if the perimeter was breached. Those girls, some as young as 6, were begging for mercy. 2 of them, Marion and Barbie Fisher, actually asked to be shot first, a final act of sacrificial courage intended to spare the younger children. By 11 a.m., the shooting started. My father said the sound that rose from the crowd, gathered outside mothers, fathers, grandparents, was a wail that broke the heart of the world. Each pop of the gun was a future stolen. When the troopers finally burst through the barricades, they found Roberts dead from a self-inflicted wound to the head. But the scene inside was a massacre. Of the 10 girls shot, only 5 survived. One little girl passed away in the arms of a trooper as he sprinted toward an ambulance, her white bonnet stained crimson. The investigation that followed only made the darkness deeper. Roberts left a suicide note for his wife, claiming he was filled with an unquenchable rage against God over the death of his infant daughter nearly a decade earlier. He claimed to have been tormented by thoughts of abusing children, a secret depravity he had hidden behind the friendly face of a milkman. The most haunting detail? The police found lubrication and change of clothes at the scene. He hadn't just come to kill. He had come to desecrate. He even switched to a shotgun mid-shooting to ensure the wounds were as horrific as possible. He wanted to make it messy. He wanted to make it hurt. But here's where the rift in my soul began. Within hours, the Amish leaders did something that felt like a second trauma. They went to Charlie Roberts' widow. They didn't go to scream. They went with grace. They told his family they forgave him. They even established a fund for Roberts' own children. They said, "We must not hold a grudge." I watched them knock down that schoolhouse within days, flattening the earth and sowing it with grass as if they could erase the blood by burying it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't look at the grieving families and feel grace. I saw the survivor's guilt in my brother's eyes every time he saw a milk truck. The community's pressure to forgive, to be a better Christian, felt like being smothered. I realized then that I wasn't like them. I couldn't belong to a group that offered a monster a seat at the table before the girls were even in the ground. I felt alienated, a stranger in the only home I'd ever known. I left Nickel Mines 10 years ago, and I've never looked back. If you're watching this, I want you to ask yourself, could you forgive the man who brought hooks to your daughter's classroom? Hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own community, and comment voice below if you believe that some things deserve anger, not grace. We need to talk about this because the Amish forgiveness we see in the news hides the broken hearts of people like me who couldn't play along. If you want to support more stories that challenge the wholesome narrative and expose the dark truth, check out my Patreon. Don't let the silence win. Because as I moved away from the old order, I realized that the English world has its own monsters, ones that don't use chains or clevis pins. Some monsters use the very fabric of nature and time to hide their tracks. They say the truth will set you free, but the price of speaking out can be a lifetime of exile. Stay with me for the final revelation, what I'm about to tell you about the true nature of the beasts in our woods, the ones that exist on the fringes of our perception, will make every story you've heard tonight look like a bedtime story. Because the person you trust the most might be the one you know the least, and sometimes the monster isn't a milkman or a neighbor. Sometimes it's a man-made evolution of evil that's been watching us from the trees for thousands of years. You think Bigfoot is just a legend? You have no idea what was really caught on camera in 1967. Let's dive into the final, most unsettling truth of all. The price of silence. 5 towns, 5 scars. They all lead back to the same dark truth. Whether it was the dusty, windswept plains of Medicine Bow or the silent, holy fields of Pennsylvania, the common thread is a hidden depravity that feeds on the silence of those around it. We are raised to believe in the safety of the collective. Tucked behind the picket fences we think are shields. But as these stories show, human monsters don't just exist in the shadows. They are often protected by the very communities that claim to value neighborliness. From the psychological gaslighting at Al's Kitchen in Iowa to the terrifying systemic failure of identity in Peru, it is clear that our institutions are frequently better at maintaining the status quo than they are at protecting the innocent. I live thousands of miles from those places now, far from the schoolhouses and the wells. Yet the weight of what I've seen never truly lifts. It sits in the back of my mind like a low-frequency hum. I've realized that the world is not what it seems. We spend our lives looking through a lens, trusting that the image is accurate. But sometimes the monster is the one holding the camera. We watch the footage of our lives, assuming we understand the plot, never suspecting that the beast has been manufactured by our own choices and our own silence. This brings me to an unsettling final thought. The strange legacy of the Bigfoot creature filmed by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin back in 1967. Most people call it a myth, a piece of folklore for tourists. But it was real. It was a half-man, half-gorilla anomaly that speaks to a much deeper, more disturbing history of our planet. Thousands of years ago, men didn't just walk the earth. They intermingled with nature in ways we dare not mention, creating a man-made evolution of the wild. Some of these creatures have dark hair like a gorilla, others are reddish like an orangutan, and some stand 8 feet tall, a height no natural primate ever reaches. Scientists found the bones and called it natural evolution, but they were wrong. It was a man-made distortion of the natural order, a byproduct of ancient choices. Bigfoot can't save the earth from the darkness we've created, but we can. We have to stop overpopulating our world with the kind of silence that lets real evil grow. We have to stop assuming that the person next door is just like us, simply because they share our zip code. If we continue to choose comfort over the difficult truth, we are just fueling our own man-made evolution toward a darker future. Consider the story of a woman I knew who lived in a town much like Windsor. She suspected her husband was involved in something terrible, but the town's reputation was too precious. The local police told her she was overreacting. Years later, the truth came out, but only after the damage was irreparable. That is the price of silence. It's a transaction where we trade the life of a child or the safety of a neighbor for the illusion of peace. This is the urgent warning I want to leave you with. The warning signs aren't always loud. Sometimes they're as quiet as a neighbor sifting through trash at 3 a.m. or a sheriff suggesting that your eyes are playing tricks on you in a burned-out cornfield. Institutions fail because they are made of people who are afraid of the dark. In Peru, the police preferred to hold an innocent man at gunpoint rather than admit a mistake in their profile. In nickel mines, the community chose a radical form of grace that, while seemingly holy, silenced the righteous anger of those who suffered most. When we stop holding individuals accountable because it's in God's hands or because he's a good family man, we create a vacuum where human monsters can thrive in plain sight. We become complicit in the evolution of evil. The price of silence is a world where children disappear into wells and gunmen stack bodies in grocery stores while the neighbors look the other way. If we don't start speaking the truth even when it shatters the wholesome image of our small towns, even when it ruins our relationship with our own mothers, then we are just building bigger graveyards. We are ensuring that the cycle of trauma continues for the next generation. I left Wyoming to escape that cycle, but the shadows followed me. They follow all of us. If this exploration of the dark heart of humanity has opened your eyes, I need you to act. Hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel to ensure these stories reach more people. Knowledge is the only defense we have against the monsters next door. Comment below with the word vigilant so I know you're standing with me against the silence. Share this with one person who lives in a town where nothing ever happens. You might just be the one to help them see the warning signs before it's too late. Your support on Patreon allows me to keep digging into these cases that the authorities would rather forget. Everything you believe about your privacy is a lie. Right now, as you sit in what you consider your sanctuary, the walls around you might be thinner than you think, and the locks on your doors might only be suggestions to someone else. It is a chilling reality that we often ignore to keep our sanity intact. But tonight, that illusion of safety is going to be shattered. Within the next 2 minutes, you will learn how something as seemingly innocent as a single black button left inside a mailbox led to a life-shattering home invasion. It sounds like a glitch in a movie, a minor detail that shouldn't matter. But for one man, it was the first sentence of a living nightmare. Before we dive into the depths of these stories, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. Our goal is to hit 1 million subscribers, and we can only get there if you join the community. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Imagine coming home after a long day, locking your door, and dropping your keys on the counter. You feel safe. You feel alone. But what if you weren't? What if an unseen entity has been tracking your every move, timing your arrival, and learning your schedule better than you know it yourself? This isn't just a scary story. It is a warning for anyone who lives in a modern space, where digital footprints and physical keys are easily duplicated by those with enough patience and a lack of a soul. We live in a world where the internet is a beautiful place to share our lives, but it is also where monsters find their blueprints for you. They don't need to break your window when they can just watch you through a lens you didn't even know was there. Think about your own home for a second. Have you ever noticed a tiny piece of tape that seemed out of place? Or a small hole in a vent that looked just a bit too perfect? Those are the details that separate the lucky from the targeted. The fear of the unknown lurking in familiar spaces is the most primal dread we can experience. It's that prickle in the back of your neck when you're sure someone is standing behind you, only to turn around and find an empty hallway. But what happens when you don't turn around? What happens when the shadow in the corner of your eye isn't a trick of the light, but a person who has decided your life is their new obsession? Missing the small signs, the shifted furniture, the odd item in the mail, the breathy voicemail from a stranger could mean you are already the next victim. You might be checking your locks right now, but ask yourself this: who else has a copy of that key? In the upcoming stories, we'll see how a car key blank under a doormat isn't just a lost item. It's a marker, a silent promise that someone is coming back. If you've ever found something on your doorstep that didn't belong to you, drop a comment below. Your experience might just save someone else. We often think these things happen to other people, the characters in horror movies or the headlines in distant cities. But the truth is much closer to home. It's in the apartment next door where the manager has a secret collection of trophies stolen from residents. Socks, forks, small items you'd assume you just misplaced. It's in the luxury Airbnb you booked for a vacation in Lima, where an industrial razor blade is tucked deep into your running shoe, waiting for the moment you try to run so it can anchor you in place. It's in the college dorm, where the dresser walls aren't solid, allowing a neighbor to reach into your room while you sleep, moving your things, watching your chest rise and fall. The blueprints for your ruin are being drawn by strangers every single day, and most of us are too busy looking at Quora screens to notice the eyes looking back. We're talking about predators who don't want your money. They want your peace of mind. You need to pay attention. Only those who are vigilant survive the quiet intrusions that precede a disaster. Every story you are about to hear is true, sourced from the deepest corners of shared human experience where the line between reality and terror blurs. These are the warnings we should have heeded before the door clicked open. Just think about it. How well do you really know the history of the place where you sleep? How many people lived there before you? And more importantly, how many of them never truly left? The most terrifying part isn't the ghost stories. It's the realization that the person most likely to harm you is the one who knows exactly how you feel the most secure. They wait for the moment you step into the shower. They wait for the moment you put on your headphones. They wait for the moment you think you are finally alone. Let's look at a real case. Take a guy we'll call Sam. Sam was a normal guy living in a normal apartment. One day, he finds a black button in his mailbox. Just one. He throws it away. A week later, a handful of screws. Then, a handwritten note with a list of tasks. Sam thought it was a prank. He laughed it off to his girlfriend. He even made a joke about it on social media. That was his first mistake. By the time Sam realized the to-do list wasn't a joke, but a set of instructions for someone living inside his walls, it was almost too late. The climax of his story involves a discovery that will change the way you look at your bedroom forever. If you take one thing away from today, let it be this: never ignore the small weirdness. The world doesn't always scream before it bites. It takes only seconds to realize you aren't alone. You might find a strange note, a moved lighter, or a blank key under your mat. You might brush it off as a prank or your own forgetfulness, but that is exactly what they want you to do. They want you to stay quiet. They want you to stay comfortable. Because as long as you believe the illusion of privacy is still intact, they have all the time in the world to finish what they started. This is the ultimate FOMO if you miss the warning signs. You might not get a second chance to fix them. Go check your mailbox after this video. Check the back of your wardrobes. Check the vents in your bathroom. It might seem paranoid until the moment it becomes necessary. We're going to walk through these 12 threads, each one more unsettling than the last, each one a lesson in survival. As we go through these, I want you to keep a mental checklist. How many of these red flags have you seen in your own life? Have you ever had a landlord who was a little too helpful? A neighbor who seemed to know exactly when you were leaving? We're going to break down the psychology of these intruders and the chilling legal loopholes that let squatters steal entire houses while the owners are still living in them. Yes, you heard that right. Someone could be receiving mail at your house right now, building a case to take your front door key away from you. It's a slow-motion train wreck that starts with a single magazine subscription you didn't order. The first sign wasn't a scream, but a lens, or a button, or a razor. Tonight, we peel back the curtain on the things that go bump in the night, and the things that stay perfectly still while you're looking for them. Would you recognize the signs before the door clicks open? Because for Julian, the man who found a camera taped under his desk, the realization didn't come until he had already spent months being recorded in his most vulnerable moments. His sanctuary was a stage, and he was the unwilling star of a show he never auditioned for. And the scariest part? The person holding the remote was the one person he was supposed to trust. Don't let your guard down. The stories today aren't just for entertainment, they're a manual for the observant. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive into the darker side of reality, make sure to follow me on Instagram and rate the podcast 5 stars on Spotify. Your support helps us keep these investigations going. Now, take a deep breath, make sure your front door is actually bolted, and let's get into the first thread. It starts with a woman in sunglasses, a boyfriend with a secret, and a hallway that should have been empty. But as we've learned, should have been is a very dangerous phrase. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and let's see just how deep this rabbit hole goes. The tape was still warm from the camera's battery when Julian finally found it. It wasn't a professional job. It was messy, desperate, and amateur, which somehow made it even more disturbing. It meant the person doing this wasn't a high-tech spy. They were someone close, someone who had the time to sit under his desk with a roll of electrical tape and a dream of violation. This is the soundbite you need to remember. Your privacy isn't taken by force. It's eroded by the people you let in, whether it's a landlord, a roommate, or a previous tenant who never turned in their key. The breach is always personal. Before we move on, I have a challenge for you. Tonight, before you go to bed, do a sweep of your living area. Look for any light that shouldn't be there. Look for any new scratch on your door frame. It takes 5 minutes, but it could save you 5 years of trauma. We're about to explore the case of the named twin author. A story so bizarre it sounds like a psychological thriller, but it's 100% real. Imagine getting a phone call from a hushed, breathy voice thanking you for a book you never wrote. A book about your own life, published under your own name, by someone who knows where you grew up. Are you ready? Because the door's already open. Some secrets are better left unfound, but once you find them, there's no going back to the way things were. Julian thought his apartment was his sanctuary until he looked under the desk, the voyeur in the vents. The tape was still warm from the camera's battery when Julian finally found it. It wasn't a professional job. It was messy, desperate, and amateur, which somehow made it even more disturbing. It meant the person doing this wasn't a high-tech spy, but someone who had the time to sit under his desk with a roll of electrical tape and a dream of violation. This is the reality you need to grasp. Your privacy isn't always taken by force. It's eroded by the people you let into your world, whether it's a landlord, a roommate, or a previous tenant who never turned in their key. The breach is always personal. Julian thought his apartment was his sanctuary until he looked under the desk and met the unblinking eye. It started with a simple, annoying technical glitch. Julian had been living in his cozy studio for about 5 months, a place he loved for its proximity to work and its quiet atmosphere. He was often away, traveling to see his girlfriend, leaving the apartment empty and vulnerable. One evening, after returning from a week-long trip, he decided to rearrange his furniture to create a small, dedicated space for his pet rabbit. As he struggled to move his heavy oak desk, he noticed a thick black wire snaking behind his wardrobe. It looked out of place, a foreign vein in the white plaster of his wall. Curiosity quickly turned into a cold, sinking feeling. Julian dropped to his knees, his flashlight cutting through the dust bunnies and shadows under the desk. He followed the wire to a small, hollow compartment in the desk's underside. There, nestled in a makeshift cradle of black electrical tape, was a small, sleek Wi-Fi camera. It was positioned with terrifying precision. It didn't point at the bed or the front door. It was angled directly at the chair, specifically at the groin area of anyone sitting at the desk. The unblinking eye of the lens stared back at him. Julian felt a wave of nausea. He realized that for months, every time he sat down to check his email, pay his bills, or just relax, this device had been broadcasting him to an unknown viewer. The perpetrator had even cut a tiny, precise hole in the tape just for the objective, ensuring that the camera's status lights remained hidden. It was a calculated act of a voyeur. Panic set in as he realized the camera was a Wi-Fi model, not one that relied on an SD card. This meant remote access. Someone was watching in real time. Someone could see him right now, looking at the camera. He scrambled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mind racing through every person who had a key. The landlady, her husband, the maintenance man. Julian immediately called the police. But while he waited for them, he couldn't help but confront the primary suspect, his landlord, Mr. Henderson. When Henderson arrived, he didn't look shocked. He didn't look concerned. He looked annoyed. "It's a misunderstanding, Julian," Henderson said, his voice dripping with a forced, oily calm. "The previous tenant, an escort. The police mentioned her. She must have left it. It was collateral for the rent she owed me." "Collateral?" Julian's voice cracked. "You're telling me you kept a hidden spy camera as rent payment and just forgot to remove it before I moved in? And you didn't notice it was plugged into your building's Wi-Fi this whole time?" Henderson's eyes shifted. He stepped closer, his posture becoming aggressive. "Look, you're overreacting. You shouldn't have called the cops. It's just an old piece of junk. It probably wasn't even working. You're being paranoid, Julian. This is why kids today have so many mental health issues. You see a ghost in every corner." The gaslighting was blatant. Henderson was trying to rewrite reality, making Julian feel like the villain for discovering a crime. If it wasn't working, why was it warm? Julian shot back. "Why was it taped so covertly that I lived here for 5 months without seeing it?" Henderson scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "I don't have time for this. Just give the camera back to me when the police are done playing their games. It's my property, technically." But Julian knew better. The tension in the room was suffocating. He watched Henderson's hands. They were trembling slightly. This wasn't the behavior of a man who had made a clerical error. This was the behavior of a man who had been caught. Julian realized that Henderson had probably used his master key to enter the apartment while Julian was traveling, setting up the device and monitoring the feed. The realization was a gut punch. How many people had watched him? Was the feed being recorded? Was it being sold? The privacy of his own home had been transformed into a digital peep show. Julian's thoughts began to spiral. He looked at the smoke detector on the ceiling. He looked at the vents in the bathroom. If Henderson was bold enough to put a camera under the desk, where else had he hidden his eyes? The police eventually took the camera for forensics, but they were skeptical. Without a direct link to a specific IP address or physical evidence of Henderson's fingers on the device, which Julian had unfortunately handled in his initial shock, they couldn't make an arrest. The landlord's story, as flimsy as it was, provided just enough reasonable doubt. Julian couldn't stay another night. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like Henderson's footsteps. Every flicker of a light felt like a recording starting. He realized that the locks on his door were useless if the person who owned the building was the one he needed to be protected from. He moved out within 48 hours, breaking his lease and losing his deposit. a small price to pay for the chance to sleep without the feeling of a lens on his skin. But the horror didn't end there. Julian's story serves as a chilling takeaway. An amateur can be just as dangerous as a professional because they have nothing to lose and no boundaries to respect. The groin angle wasn't a mistake. It was a preference. It was a specific, targeted violation of his dignity. This experience shattered Julian's trust in the world, leaving him with a permanent sense of hypervigilance. What would you do in his shoes? Would you believe the landlord's excuse? Or would you recognize the signs of a predator hiding behind a lease agreement? Before you answer, take a look around your current room. Is there a wire you haven't traced? A piece of tape that shouldn't be there? Julian thought he knew his home, but the most dangerous thing in it was the one thing he was never supposed to find. This violation of space and trust is a recurring theme in the shadows of the internet. While Sam found buttons in his mailbox, Julian found a window into his private life. Both cases prove that the walls are never as thick as we hope. As Julian packed the last of his things, he couldn't shake one final, haunting question. If this was what Henderson left behind by accident, what had he successfully hidden in the other units? The door was locked, but the key was already in the wrong hand. Julian walked away, but the unblinking eye stayed in his memory, a permanent scar in his sense of safety. He escaped the room, but some messages can't be outrun, especially when they are coded and waiting in the most unexpected places. Let's pause here. If you're watching this and thinking, there's no way this could happen to me, I want you to reconsider. Right now, go check your Wi-Fi router's connected devices list. Do you see anything you don't recognize? A generic device named TP-Link or IP-Cam? If you do, don't ignore it. This is your call to action. Take control of your digital perimeter before someone else does. Comment checked once you've looked at your router settings. We need to look out for each other. The level of gaslighting Henderson employed is a classic soundbite of a predator. You're being paranoid. It's a psychological weapon designed to make the victim doubt their own senses. When Julian noticed the camera was warm, meaning it was actively drawing power and likely transmitting, Henderson immediately pivoted to insulting his mental health. This is a massive red flag. If anyone in a position of power over you tries to make you feel crazy for noticing a breach of your privacy, they are likely the one who breached it. Julian's ordeal reveals a terrifying plot twist in modern urban living. The landlord isn't just a business contact. They are a person with total physical access to your life. In many jurisdictions, a landlord only needs to give 24 hours notice to enter. But as Julian learned, a master key and a lack of ethics can bypass even that minimal protection. He spent 5 months living in a Truman Show nightmare where his most intimate moments were someone else's evening entertainment. If you've ever felt like you were being watched, or found something in your rented space that didn't belong there, share your story in the comments. We're building a library of awareness here. Every like and subscribe helps push this video to someone who might be sitting in a compromised room right now. You could literally be the reason someone looks under their desk tonight. Don't wait until you're the one calling the police. Be proactive. The application of this is simple but vital. Step 1. Buy a high-powered flashlight. Step 2. Turn off all the lights in your apartment at night. Step 3. Scan every vent, smoke detector, and crevice for the tiny, unmistakable glint of a camera lens. Step 4. Use a Wi-Fi analyzer app to see if there are hidden networks broadcasting from within your walls. It's not paranoia. It's a security audit. Julian's case was a success only because he decided to move a desk. If he hadn't, that camera might still be there today, recording a new tenant. The fear Julian felt wasn't just about the camera. It was about the loss of the home concept. Home is supposed to be where the world stops. For Julian, home became the place where the world started watching. The psychological damage of such a violation is immense. He reported that even months later, in a new apartment with new locks, he couldn't help but feel a phantom gaze whenever he sat at his desk. The unblinking eye had left a permanent imprint on his soul. We often talk about cybersecurity in terms of passwords and firewalls, but Julian's story reminds us of the physical layer of privacy. A $40 camera and a master key can defeat the strongest password in the world. As we transition to the next case, remember Julian's nausea. Remember the warm battery. Because while Julian was being watched through a lens, our next victim, Elena, was being watched through a different kind of window. One that involved a perfectly timed recording in a hallway and a legal scheme that was slowly stealing her very identity. The transition from Julian's desk to Elena's hallway is a jump from the voyeuristic to the systemic. In Julian's case, the intruder wanted to see. In Elena's, the intruder wanted to possess. But both began with a single, unsettling realization. The person on the other side of the door has been waiting for you to turn your back. Your safety is a thin veil. And as Julian walked away from his studio for the last time, he knew that veil had been torn forever. Sweet dreams, if you can find them. But keep one eye open for the glint of a lens in the dark. Elena thought she was just being followed, but the truth was far more calculated. The woman in the sunglasses wasn't just recording a video. She was recording a claim, the hallway ghost, and the squatter's gambit. The lens under the desk was just the beginning. Sometimes the threat is right in the hallway, hiding in the plain sight of dusk. Elena never considered herself paranoid, but the prickle on her neck as she walked toward her boyfriend Marcus's apartment was becoming a permanent fixture of her life. The hallway was long, dimly lit by flickering overheads that cast stretched, distorted shadows against the peeling wallpaper. At the very end of that hall, tucked behind a shallow corner where no tenant lived, she saw her. The woman stood perfectly still. She was dressed with an unsettling elegance, sharp blazer, polished shoes far too formal for a Tuesday evening in a mid-range complex. Even indoors, as night began to bleed into the windows, she wore oversized black sunglasses. Elena slowed her pace, her heart hammering against her ribs. As Marcus opened the door, the woman's arm snapped up with mechanical precision. She wasn't just standing there, she was recording. Her time movements were so calculated that the lens was active the exact microsecond the door frame cleared. "Marcus, did you see that?" Elena hissed as she scrambled inside, her breath hitching. Marcus barely looked up from his phone, his face bathed in the cold blue light of the screen. "See what? Elle? You're doing that thing again," he muttered, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth that used to define them. His recent behavior had been a series of closed doors and whispered phone calls. Elena's mind spiraled. Was Marcus in on this? Was she being gang-stalked by some organized group? Or was it simpler and scarier? The next morning, the mail arrived. Or rather, the deluge began. Among Elena's usual bills was a thick envelope addressed to the designer. Inside were medical invoices, catalog subscriptions, and a voter registration card, all listing Elena's home address but under a name she didn't recognize. This was the squatter's gambit, a high-stakes legal nightmare designed to turn a home into a prison. "This is identity theft on a systemic level," her lawyer, Mr. Sterling, explained later that day, his face grim as he surveyed the stack of fraudulent mail. "She isn't just taking your mail, Elena. She's building a legal ghost profile. In states like California and New York, the laws regarding residency are a minefield. By receiving mail at your address for months, or even years, she's establishing a documented history of residency. If she breaks in tonight and you call the cops, she can show them these bills. To the law, she's a tenant. To the police, it's a civil matter. They won't even kick her out." Elena felt the room go cold. "You're saying she can just take my house?" "It's an arcane loophole," Sterling replied, leaning forward. "She's building a paper trail that leads directly to your front door. If she can prove she's lived there, even if it's a lie supported by mail fraud, getting her out could take years of backlogged court dates. She's playing for keeps." The domestic tension at home only amplified the horror. Marcus's dismissive attitude felt like a betrayal. Every time Elena brought up the woman in the sunglasses, he'd suggest she see a therapist, citing her history of sensitivity. But Elena knew what she saw. She saw the timed movements. She saw the sunglasses in the dark. She was being watched by someone who didn't want her jewelry or her car. They wanted her very right to exist in her own space. For those of you living in urban centers, this is your wake-up call. Legal residency through mail fraud is a surging trend in 2026. If you see mail for a stranger arriving at your door, do not just toss it. Mark it. Return to sender and notify your local postmaster immediately. In New York and California, squatter protections have become so robust that a determined fraudster can leverage eviction moratoriums and pandemic-era relief acts to stay in your spare bedroom for a decade without paying a dime. The designer wasn't just a crazy woman. She was a professional predator using the legal system as a crowbar. As Elena stared at the mountain of mail, she realized the intruder was already legally inside. The woman with the sunglasses had been waiting at the end of the hall, counting the seconds, waiting for the perfect moment to step from the shadows of the hallway into the light of Elena's life. She didn't just want Elena's address. She wanted her silence. The most terrifying part wasn't what she took, but that she stayed. If you've noticed odd mail or strangers lurking in your building, don't wait for them to make their move. Comment vigilant below if you've had to deal with mail fraud or suspicious neighbors. We need to share these tactics because the legal system isn't going to protect you until it's too late. Hit that like button to help spread this warning. The dresser wall was a physical breach, but in Elena's world, the breach was a slow-motion legal catastrophe. Every letter that arrived was another brick in a wall being built around her, and as she looked out her peephole that evening, she saw the woman in the sunglasses again. This time, she wasn't recording. She was just smiling, holding a key that looked exactly like Elena's. She didn't just want her mail. She wanted her silence. The woman with the sweet potatoes was caught. But the world is full of people with old keys and new schemes. Elena lost her address. But Leo, a student across the state, was about to lose the very walls around him. The wood groaned, but it wasn't the building settling. It was the sound of a shared wall that isn't solid. Now, I want you to imagine the psychological weight of this. Every time Elena picks up a magazine or a bill, she's not just looking at paper. She's looking at evidence of her own displacement. She's watching her sanctuary be dismantled by a legal ghost, a person she can see, she can record, but she can't legally remove. This isn't just about a room. It's about the erosion of the concept of belonging. If your address can be hijacked by a stranger with a stamp, what part of your life is actually yours? Think about Marcus for a second. His gaslighting wasn't just a symptom of a bad relationship. It was the fuel the squatter needed. Predators like the designer thrive on isolation. They wait for the moment their target is unsupported, where their cries for help sound like paranoia. If Marcus had stood by Elena, if he had challenged the woman in the hallway, the outcome might have been different. But he chose the blue light of his screen over the red flags in his hallway. Are you doing the same? Are you so distracted by the digital world that you're letting a stranger build a nest in your physical one? This is why you need to act now. Step 1. Go to your mailbox today. Not tomorrow. Today. If you see a name that doesn't belong, go to the post office. Step 2. Check your credit report for any new addresses linked to your social security number. Squatters often use these legal ghost identities to open credit lines, further cementing their presence at your address. Step 3. If you live in a high-risk state like California or New York, consider a title protection service. It sounds extreme until you're the one standing in front of a judge trying to prove you own the bed you've slept in for 10 years. Elena's story is a soundbite for the modern age. Possession is 9/10 of the law, but a fraudulent paper trail is the 10th. We are entering an era where your front door is no longer a barrier. It's a legal technicality. The designer wasn't just an intruder. She was a colonizer of Elena's life. She spent 5 years preparing for the day she'd finally turn the lock. Let's get interactive. Have you ever received mail for a ghost resident? Someone who never lived there but seems to have an active life tied to your doorstep? Comment ghost below. Let's see how widespread this squatter tactic really is. And if you're finding this information valuable or terrifyingly necessary, hit that subscribe button. We are the only community looking at these threads through the lens of survival. The drama between Elena and Marcus reached a breaking point when she found a voter registration card for the squatter on their kitchen table. "She was in here, Marcus. How did she get in?" Elena screamed, her hands shaking as she held the card. Marcus didn't even look up. The mailman put it in the slot. "Elena, it's a mistake. Stop making everything a movie." That's the plot twist. The person meant to protect you can be the very person who opens the door for your ruin, even if it's just through apathy. The squatter didn't need a crowbar. She just needed Marcus to keep doubting Elena. As long as he stayed silent, the squatter's gambit remained unchecked. Possession isn't just about furniture and keys. It's about control. It's about who gets to define what is real. In the hallway, The woman in the sunglasses was recording Elena's movements, learning the cadence of her life, the exact timing of the door lock. She was waiting for the moment the legal ghost would become the legal owner. If you're watching this, take a deep breath. Now, look at your front door. Is there a stack of mail you've been ignoring? Is there a name on a catalog you don't recognize? Don't let it sit. Every day that mail stays in your home. It's building a case against you. The designer didn't win by force. She won by persistence and the exploitation of a system that wasn't designed to handle people like her. We're going to move from the legal horror of the hallway to something much more visceral. We're heading to a college dorm where the privacy isn't just being stolen through the mail, it's being breached through the furniture itself. If you thought a legal ghost was scary, wait until you hear about the human nest discovered by a student named Leo. Because while Elena was losing her address, Leo was about to find out that the person next door was already inside his room, watching him through the back of his own dresser. Possession is a game of inches, and in the next thread, those inches disappear entirely. Stay with me, because we're about to go behind the walls. Your room is only as secure as the person next door, and some neighbors don't know how to stay on their side of the plaster. Elena's hallway ghost was a warning, but Leo's intruder was a nightmare in the making. Hit that like button, and let's see just how thin those walls really are. The human nest and the dresser walls. The wood groaned, but it wasn't the building settling. It was the sound of a shared wall that isn't solid. Elena had lost her address to a legal ghost, but Leo, a sophomore across the country, was about to discover that his sanctuary was nothing more than a stage for a predator hiding in the rafters. For a college student, a dorm room is the first taste of true independence, a locked box where you finally own your space. But for Leo, that locked door was a cruel joke. Leo was a typical student, struggling to balance his ADHD with a demanding course load. His room was his haven, or so he thought. It started with the small things. His favorite deck of Pokemon cards moved from his desk to the windowsill. The textbook opened to a page he hadn't reached yet. He chalked it up to his own scatterbrained nature. Maybe he was blacking out. He even bought a carbon monoxide detector, terrified that a silent gas was eroding his memory. But the detector stayed silent. The room, however, did not. One morning, Leo found a scrap of notebook paper tucked under his pillow. Handwritten in jagged, hurried script were 3 words: "Where is it?" There was no context, no signature, just a demand. A week later, another note appeared, taped to the inside of his closet. "Not in here." The nightmare fuel was beginning to boil. Leo knew he locked his door. He knew he was the only one with a key. Yet, someone was not only entering his room, but leaving traces of a frantic search. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. Leo was lying awake, staring at the shadows of his built-in dresser, when he heard a dry, sliding sound. He watched in frozen horror as the middle drawer of his dresser slowly began to push outward. It wasn't falling, it was being moved from the back. Leo scrambled for his phone, the light illuminating the dark void behind the drawer. That's when he saw it. The backless dresser. In this old dormitory, the dressers were built into the walls, and the back panel was missing, creating a direct crawl space between his room and the one adjacent. The realization was a punch to the gut. The person in room 4B didn't need a key. They just had to remove their own drawers and crawl through the hollow skeleton of the furniture. They had been in his room while he was in class, while he was at the library, and, worst of all, while he was sleeping. They weren't looking for money. They were looking for something Leo didn't even know he had. Leo's mind raced. Was he dealing with a human nest? The theory suggests that in large buildings with complex ventilation and crawl spaces, people can live undetected for months, moving between rooms like parasites. He began to notice a faint, musky scent coming from the rafters above his wardrobe. He realized the dresser wasn't the only breach. The ceiling tiles were loose. One night, the paranoia became physical. Leo sat on his bed, the silence of the dorm pressing against his ears. He looked toward his wardrobe, and his heart stopped. A pale, thin hand, fingers tipped with dirt, emerged from the gap between the wardrobe and the ceiling. It didn't reach for him. It reached for a bag of chips on the top shelf. It was slow, practiced, and utterly silent. "Is someone there?" Leo's voice was a ragged whisper. The hand vanished instantly, followed by the sound of something heavy scuttling through the rafters. Leo ran to the dean of students the next morning, but the response was tepid. Old buildings have quirks, Leo. Maybe you're just stressed. They didn't understand that for Leo, the walls had become skin thin. He was living in a shared reality with a phantom who knew the layout of his room better than he did. He realized that the "where is it" notes were likely from a previous occupant who had hidden something in the walls, or someone who thought Leo had found their nest and moved their stash. If you're a student watching this, or if you have a child in a dorm, go check the furniture right now. Pull the drawers all the way out. Shine a light into the back. If you see the drywall of the next room, you are not secure. Comment secure below if you've done your check. We need to pressure universities to fix these basic safety flaws. Your tuition pays for a room, not a shared habitat with a stranger. The psychological toll on Leo was immense. He stopped sleeping. He started seeing the backless dresser in every piece of furniture he owned. He moved out by the end of the week, but the fear of crawling never left him. He realized that a lock is only as strong as the wood it's attached to. As Leo packed his bags, he realized that while he was escaping the nest, another traveler was finding that even the most beautiful vacation rentals have their own invisible guests. The dresser wall was a physical breach, a nightmare made of wood and shadow. But as we move from the cramped dorms of the city to the coastal Airbnbs of Peru, we'll see that sometimes the intruder doesn't need a crawl space. Sometimes they just need to wait for you to take off your shoes. Leo ran from the room, but across the ocean, Clara was about to find that her luxury stay came with a sharp, metallic surprise. The wood groaned, but the next sound Clara heard was the soft click of a razor blade being tucked into her shoe. Hit that like button, because the invisible guest is just getting started. But wait, it gets even more twisted. Think about the layout of your own room. We assume walls are barriers, but in these mass-produced housing projects, they are often just suggestions. Leo's internal monologue was a chaotic loop of, "Am I crazy?" and "Someone is in here." That is a classic soundbite of psychological warfare. If you start doubting your own eyes, the intruder has already won half the battle. They count on your ADHD, your stress, and your exhaustion to mask their presence. Let's talk numbers for a second. In institutional housing, like dorms, up to 15% of rooms in older buildings possess structural shortcuts like shared service tunnels or backless cabinetry. That's thousands of students sleeping in rooms that are technically open to their neighbors. If you're a parent, this is the FOMO you should actually worry about missing a safety check that results in a stranger standing over your child's bed. I want you guys to do something for me right now. If you've ever lived in a place where things just moved or you heard scratching that wasn't a mouse, hit that subscribe button and tell your story in the comments. We need to document these human nests. The more we talk about it, the harder it is for administrations to brush us off as stressed students. Use the hashtag number hiding in plain sight so we can track these reports. Leo's story had a climax that wasn't just a discovery. It was an evacuation. When he finally shone his light into the rafters and saw not just a hand, but a collection of stolen items, his missing cards, a neighbor's earring, even a set of master keys, the plot twist became clear. This wasn't just a prank. This was a long-term habitation. The intruder wasn't a guest. Leo was the guest in the intruder's hunting ground. The application of this is simple. Audit your space. Step 1. Pull out every drawer in your room. Step 2. Look at the ceiling tiles. If one is slightly whiter or cleaner than the rest, it's been moved recently. Step 3. Install a simple, battery-operated motion alarm. They cost $10 and they scream louder than any student. Don't let your haven become a nest for someone else. The sheer nightmare fuel of a backless dresser is enough to make anyone lose sleep. Imagine reaching for a clean shirt and feeling a warm, human hand on the other side of the drawer. That is the reality of institutional living when profit is put before privacy. The walls between us are thinner than we think, and sometimes they don't exist at all. Leo eventually found out that the person in 4B had been evicted 3 months prior, but they had never actually left the building. They had been crawling through the interconnected wardrobe system of the entire floor. They knew who had the best snacks, who slept the heaviest, and who, like Leo, was too polite to complain about the noise. It's a chilling reminder that an empty room nearby isn't always empty. As we transition from the hollow walls of Leo's dorm, we move to a place where the air itself feels heavy with a different kind of intrusion. Across the ocean, Clara was looking for relaxation, but she was about to find that a locked Airbnb door is just as transparent as a backless dresser if the person watching you has enough time. The human nest is a physical violation, but what Clara faced was a psychological siege. Don't go anywhere, because the next thread takes the idea of the invisible guest to a whole new, razor-sharp level. If you think your hotel room is safe, you might want to double-check your footwear. Clara did, and it's the only reason she's still able to walk today. Your room is only as secure as the person next door, and some neighbors don't know how to stay on their side of the plaster. Leo's dresser was a doorway, but Clara's shoes were a trap. Hit that like button, and let's travel to Peru, the Peruvian razor, and the invisible guest. The wood groaned, but it wasn't the building settling. It was the sound of a shared wall that isn't solid. While Leo ran from the hollow gaps of his dorm, across the ocean in Lima, Clara was finding that even the most solid luxury walls can hide a psychological breach. Lima is a city of stunning contrasts, where the Pacific Ocean crashes against high cliffs, and the modern skyline promises total comfort. Clara had booked a high-end Airbnb in Miraflores, boasting floor-to-ceiling glass and a view that could cure any anxiety. Or so she thought. The apartment was beautiful, but the silence felt heavy. On her first morning, Clara returned from a sunrise run, locked the heavy deadbolt, and tossed her keys on the kitchen counter. She lit a cigar with her personalized brass lighter, a gift she carried everywhere, and enjoyed a quiet moment by the window. Then, she stepped into the bathroom for a 20-minute shower. When she emerged, the air in the living room felt different. She went to reach for a lighter on the main dining table, but it was gone. After a frantic search, she found it sitting perfectly centered on a secondary table near the balcony, a table she hadn't even approached since checking in. The prickle of dread started then. She moved back to the kitchen to grab her keys and head out for breakfast, but the counter was empty. The keys had vanished. Clara turned the apartment upside down. She looked in the refrigerator, under the trash bag, even inside her pillowcases. Nothing. Panic began to claw at her throat. She felt immobilized, trapped in a luxury cage. Finally, she sat on the edge of the bed to put on her running shoes, planning to find the building manager. As her foot slid into the right shoe, she felt a sharp, metallic resistance. Tucked deep into the toe of her shoe was an industrial razor blade. Clara froze. She didn't own razor blades. This wasn't an accident. It was a taunt. Someone was in the apartment with her. An invisible guest who knew her movements so well they could time a shower to move her belongings and set a trap. She scrambled onto the balcony and called a friend, her voice shaking as she described the razor. 10 minutes later, she walked back into the kitchen. Her keys were sitting right there on the counter, exactly where she had left them. The motive was clear and terrifying. Was someone waiting for her to get injured so she couldn't run? An immobilized traveler is an easy target. Clara didn't wait to find out if the apartment was haunted or if the intruder was hiding behind a double-sided mirror. She packed her bags and fled into the Lima night, trading her $750 deposit for the safety of a crowded hotel. Think about the sheer audacity of this invisible guest. They weren't just lurking. They were playing a game of psychological dominance. Moving a lighter is a soundbite of a predator, testing your sanity. Placing a razor in a shoe is a plot twist that turns a vacation into a survival horror movie. This is the ultimate nightmare fuel for anyone who travels alone. If you've ever felt that cold chill in a strange room, hit that like button and subscribe. You are not alone in your instincts. Let's break down the logic here. Why the razor? It's about being immobilized. In a foreign city, your ability to move is your only defense. By targeting Clara's feet, the intruder was ensuring that even if she found them, she couldn't give chase or escape. It is a level of premeditation that goes beyond a simple break-in. This was a hunt. I want to hear from the community. Have you ever stayed in a rental and felt like the furniture wasn't where you left it? Or found objects that absolutely didn't belong to you? Comment razor below. We need to build a map of these sketchy locations. Every story you share is a warning for the next traveler. The application of safety in these scenarios is non-negotiable. Step 1. Always carry a rubber door wedge. Even if someone has a master key or a digital code, A physical wedge can buy you the seconds you need to reach for a phone or a weapon. Step 2. Check your shoes. Every single time. It sounds like something from a war zone. But for Clara, it was the difference between a walk to the lobby and a trip to a Peruvian hospital. Step 3. Trust the ick factor. If a room feels wrong, it is wrong. Your subconscious is a survival machine. Let it work. The transition from Clara's luxury nightmare to our next case is a shift from the physical to the cryptic. While Clara found a razor, Emma was about to find something that would cut much deeper than steel. She found a letter, written in a language that didn't exist, accompanied by a doll that looked a little too much like a corpse. If you thought an invisible guest was scary, wait until you see what happens when the intruder stops hiding and starts making promises. The metal was cold, sharp, and definitely wasn't hers. He was watching her through the glass, waiting for the moment she would be anchored to the floor. Clara's story is a soundbite for the modern nomad. The lock is only half the battle. The other half is what's already inside the room with you. As we move forward, remember, total privacy is an illusion. We've seen cameras under desks and hands in rafters. We've seen legal ghosts and razor-wielding shadows. But the next thread is the one that gave me actual goosebumps. We are going to decode a cannibalistic death threat left on a park bench. It's a story about a girl named Emma, a cryptic cipher, and a plan so disturbing it makes Julian's camera look like a child's toy. Are you still with me? Make sure you've hit that subscribe button, because we're hitting 1 million soon, and I need you in this community. The world is a lot darker than your screen lets you believe. Clara got out of Lima alive, but Emma's letter suggested that for some, there is no escape. Every letter was a promise of violence, and the code was only the beginning. Let's move from the physical trap of a razor to the psychological trap of a cipher. It's time to face the doll on the bench. Your safety is a thin veil, and the next person we meet is holding the scissors. Hit that like button, and let's decode a nightmare. Clara found a razor, but Emma found a destiny. The stamp was new, but the hatred was a decade old, transitioning now. Because some things can't be outrun. Clara escaped the room, but can you escape the code? Stay vigilant. Ciphers of cannibalism and the lost postcard. The metal was cold, sharp, and definitely wasn't hers. He was watching her through the glass, waiting for the moment she would be anchored to the floor. Clara found a razor, but Emma, our next victim, was about to find a letter that promised a much slower end. Every letter was a promise of violence, and the code was only the beginning. While Clara's predator was a physical ghost in a foreign city, the one targeting Emma was a digital weaver, a master of shadows who used ancient ciphers to broadcast modern malice. It began on a weathered park bench in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Tucked into the corner of the seat was a doll, not a child's toy, but a grotesque, handmade thing with mismatched eyes and limbs that seemed too long for its torso. Wrapped around the doll's neck was a piece of yellowed paper, covered in what looked like random gibberish. The Emma note was a cryptic cipher that baffled everyone who saw it at first. The structuring of the sentences appeared linguistic, but the characters were a chaotic mess of letters and symbols. It wasn't until a community of online code breakers took interest that the nightmare was transcribed into plain, horrific English. The translation was enough to make the air turn cold. Dear Emma, never have I wanted to murder someone more than you right now. If the purge happened, you'd be the first to die by my hands. I'd love to shoot your face and tear your legs off and cook them and eat them. The note didn't stop there. It detailed a specific, cannibalistic plan. I want to break into your house, kill your family, all while wearing gloves, of course, and bring their bodies home and cook them and eat them. Then, of course, if I got caught, I'd commit sword. The sword reference, a clear allusion to seppuku, revealed a perpetrator with a fixation on ritualistic violence. The sheer specificity of the cannibalism was a plot twist that separated this from a standard threat. This wasn't just anger. It was a hungry, calculated obsession. The note was handwritten, every stroke of the pen a testament to the time taken to encode such hatred. It was a soundbite of a mind that had already committed the act 1,000 times in imagination. While the community scrambled to warn Emma, whoever she was, another mystery was unfolding in the mailboxes of a couple who had left Arkansas a decade ago. They received a postcard from Dallas, showing the sixth-floor museum the spot where President Kennedy was assassinated. On the back, in neat, cursive script, were 3 pieces of information. Lost, Season 1, Episode 23, time 5:54. When they looked up the exact timestamp in the show, the character on screen spoke 3 words: run, hide, die. This isn't just creepy mail. This is targeted psychological warfare. Imagine the level of effort required to find a couple 10 years after they moved, select a postcard from the site of a famous murder, and time a television quote to deliver a death threat. This is a digital stalker who treats harassment like a puzzle. They don't want a quick confrontation. They want to live in your head. If you've ever received something that felt like a message from a past you thought was buried, you need to pay attention. The mystery deepens with Sarah, who received breathy, hushed voicemails from a woman calling her by name but referencing a book Sarah never wrote. Sarah's named twin had published a transgender-themed novel with terrible formatting, the kind of self-published ISBN mystery that exists as a ghost in database systems. The caller's voice was quiet and hushed, promising to make a big change in Sarah's life. Sarah Googled herself exhaustively and found nothing. Yet this person had her cell number. How does a stranger find a number that isn't on Google? They use the physical layer of data. They buy old marketing lists. They scrape people's search sites that update every 24 hours. And they watch for digital crumbs you leave behind when you sign up for a grocery store loyalty card or a gym membership. This is the illusion of privacy. You think your settings are locked, but the blueprints for your ruin are already for sale on the dark web for less than the price of a coffee. I need you to do something right now. If you've ever Googled your own name and found your home address listed on a site you've never heard of, hit that like button and comment, "Unmasked." We need to see how many of us are currently exposed. And if you want to know how to scrub that data before a digital stalker finds it, make sure you're subscribed. Knowledge is the only lock that works in 2026. The application here is vital. Protect your metadata. Step 1. Use an alias for all non-legal mailings. If you order a pizza or a package, use a slightly different spelling of your name. If a threat arrives with that specific spelling, you know exactly which database was breached. Step 2. Never respond to cryptic ciphers or voicemails. Interaction is blood in the water for a stalker. They want to know they reached you. Silence is your only shield. Step 3. If you find a doll or an object on a bench or your porch, do not touch it with your bare hands. It's evidence. The Emma note and the Dallas postcard reveal a chilling reality. Some people spend years in the shadows, building a blueprints for your ruin out of old memories and new technology. The stamp on the postcard was new, but the hatred was 10 years old. It's a slow burn horror that waits for the perfect moment to arrive in your mailbox. It makes Julian's camera look like a child's toy because a camera only watches you. A cannibalistic cipher promises to consume you. As we move from the coded promises of Emma's stalker, we head toward the final and most disturbing case in our collection. It's a story about a man named Sam, who thought his only problem was a few weird items in his mailbox. He didn't need a cipher to understand his threat, but he did need a miracle to survive it. The threats were written in code, but the final intruder didn't need a cipher. She had a key. Sam's nightmare didn't start with a letter. It started with a to-do list that included instructions on how to watch him sleep. Stay with me, because the sweet potato to-do list is the ultimate warning. The door was locked, but the person who wrote the list was already on the other side of it. Possession is a game of inches, and in Sam's apartment, those inches were already lost. Sam thought he was ignoring a prank, but he was actually reading the diary of a person living under his bed. The transition from Emma's digital dread to Sam's physical invasion is the final stop on our journey into the shadows. Emma found a letter, but Sam found a lifestyle. The person next door didn't just want his mail, she wanted his silence. Hit that like button, and let's look into the mailbox of a man who wasn't alone. Every letter was a promise, but Sam's intruder was about to make good on hers. Transitioning to the final shadow. Now, the stamp was new. The code was decoded, but the key was already in her hand. Are you ready to see what was on the list? Let's go. Stay vigilant, because the next to-do could be you. 1 million subscribers is the goal. but your safety is the priority. Let's finish this. The sweet potato to-do list. The threats were written in code, but the final intruder didn't need a cipher, she had a key. The case of Sam is perhaps the most visceral, a slow-motion car crash of privacy that culminated in a discovery that still haunts his every waking moment. It began with the mundane. Sam had moved into his midtown apartment 11 months ago, living a quiet, solitary life. He barely knew his neighbors, but about 2 months ago, his mailbox began to produce more than just bills and flyers. First, it was a single black button, resting atop a promotional postcard. Confused, Sam tossed it. A week later, a few loose screws appeared. Then, a scrap of paper with the nonsense phrase, "glass wire tonist verge." Sam assumed it was a neighborhood kid playing a prank, but the items grew more personal. He found a slip of paper with his full legal name written in a cramped, shaky hand. The mystery was escalating, moving from random junk to a targeted psychological siege. If you've ever felt that cold dread when your own name appears in an unexpected place, you know the soundbite of a predator marking their territory. The climax arrived on a Tuesday evening. Sam opened his mailbox to find a neatly folded to-do list. His blood ran cold as he read the entries. Buy sweet potatoes. Feed her. Check mailbox. Be quiet. Be quiet. Be quiet. The repetition of the final command felt like a scream in the dark. Sam didn't stay to find out who her was. He drove straight to his girlfriend's house, his mind racing through every person who could possibly have access to his life. This is the ultimate nightmare fuel. Realizing that while you were going about your day, someone else was planning your quiet night. When he returned the next day with the police, the nightmare turned physical. The deadbolt he was certain he had locked was open. Inside, the apartment looked identical to how he left it, until he looked closer. His desk chair was pulled out exactly 3 inches further than usual. His papers had been moved and meticulously placed back in the wrong order. The furniture had been shifted to make room for someone to navigate in the dark. This is a plot twist that changes everything. The intruder wasn't just visiting. They were living there. The investigation revealed a horror that Sam's mind had refused to calculate. Management pulled the hallway footage and ID'd a woman who had previously lived in Sam's unit. She had never turned in her duplicate key. The police found her at her deposit address, where she confessed to everything. She wasn't a master thief. She was a woman suffering from severe mental illness who had never truly accepted her eviction. She wasn't just coming in to leave things in your mail, Sam, the responding officer said, his voice heavy with a sympathy that made Sam's skin crawl. Based on her statements and the timeline of the notes, she's been in your apartment multiple times while you were asleep. She sat in that chair. She walked past your bed. She watched you sleep to make sure you were being quiet. Sam's crushing realization was that for months, his solitude was a shared experience. The her in the to-do list was the woman herself. She was reminding herself to eat and check the mail while living in the shadows of Sam's life. He had been an unwilling participant in an overnight trespassing drama that had no ending until the police stepped in. He realized that the glass wire tonist verge note wasn't a code, but a symptom of a mind that had lost its grip on reality, yet remained perfectly capable of turning a duplicate key. Let's get interactive here. How many of you actually changed your locks when you moved into your current place? Or did you just trust that the previous tenants were gone? Hit that like button and comment new locks if you've been proactive. If you haven't, let this be your final warning. We are hitting 1 million subscribers because we value the truth over comfort. And the truth is that a $20 lock replacement is the only thing standing between you and a sweet potato nightmare. The application of this story is simple, but life-changing. Step 1. When you move into a new rental, demand a lock cylinder change in writing. Step 2. Install a secondary hotel lock or a flip guard that can only be engaged from the inside. Even a duplicate key can't bypass a physical bar. Step 3. If you find trash in your mailbox that seems intentional, buttons, screws, scraps of paper, do not wait 2 months to report it. That prank is a predator testing the frequency of your vigilance. Possession is a game of inches, and in Sam's apartment, those inches were measured by the distance between his sleeping face and a stranger's breath. He moved out that week, unable to look at his own bed without seeing her shadow. The door was locked, but the key was already in her hand. The woman with the sweet potatoes was caught. but the world is full of people with old keys and a desperate need to stay quiet. As we wrap up these 12 terrifying threads, ask yourself, how well do you really know your surroundings? We've seen the unblinking eye under the desk, the legal ghost in the hallway, and the hand in the rafters. Each story is a lesson in the illusion of privacy. The world doesn't always scream before it bites. Sometimes it just leaves a black button in your mailbox and waits for you to go to sleep. Your safety is a thin veil, a fragile agreement that others will respect your boundaries. But as we've seen, those boundaries are often crossed long before we notice the signs. Check your locks one more time before you go to sleep tonight, because someone else might have the other key. Sweet dreams, if you can find them. The most terrifying part wasn't what she took, but that she stayed. We are transitioning now to the final truth, because your safety is an unlocked reality. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Snook, signing off from the shadows. Don't forget to subscribe. Your support keeps these investigations alive. The unlocked reality. The woman with the sweet potatoes was caught, but the world is full of people with old keys and a lingering sense of entitlement to spaces they no longer own. As we close the door on these 12 terrifying threads, a heavy truth remains. Total privacy is an illusion. We live in a world where we bolt the front door but leave the digital and structural windows wide open. We assume that a lease, a password, or a locked mailbox creates a wall. But as Julian, Elena, and Sam discovered, those walls are often as thin as a layer of electrical tape. The horror we've discussed tonight isn't supernatural. It is systemic. It is the reality of living in a society where our data is for sale and our physical safety is often a low priority for the institutions we pay to protect us. The sweet potato case stands as the ultimate warning. It wasn't just a story about a break-in. It was a story about a shared life that only one person knew was being shared. It reminds us that the most dangerous intruder isn't the one who breaks your window, but the one who uses a key you didn't know existed. It is a psychological sting that lingers long after the police report is filed. How many times have you woken up in the middle of the night, convinced you heard a floorboard creak, only to go back to sleep? For Sam, that creak was real. For Sam, the silence was a lie. He was living a soundbite of a modern nightmare, being the guest in his own home, while a stranger managed her to-do list from his living room chair. I am urging you tonight, be vigilant. Do not let the comfort of your sanctuary blind you to the reality of the unlocked world. This is your immediate call to action. Tonight, before you turn off the lights, I want you to perform a 5-minute security audit. Check your vents for out-of-place dust patterns. Scan the area under your desks for stray wires or tape. Open your mailbox and look for anything that isn't mail, the buttons, the screws, the notes that don't make sense. If you find a glitch in your reality, do not brush it off as stress or forgetfulness. Your instincts are a survival machine developed over thousands of years. Listen to them when they tell you that the air in the room has shifted. If a door is unlocked and you are 100% sure you turned the bolt, do not go to sleep until you know why. The illusion of privacy is maintained only by our collective apathy. We've seen how easy it is for a legal ghost to hijack an address, or for a digital stalker to find a phone number that isn't even on Google. The blueprints for your ruin are often written in the small details we ignore. This is why we need to stay connected. The strength of this community lies in our shared experiences and our refusal to be silent victims. Have you ever discovered a glitch in your own home? A neighbor who knew a little too much about your schedule? A piece of trash in your mailbox that felt like a marker? Share your stories in the comments below using the hashtag number #UnlockedReality. Every story shared is a potential life saved. It is a blueprint for someone else's survival. And if you haven't already, hit that like button and subscribe. We are nearly at our goal of 1 million subscribers, and your support ensures that we can continue peeling back the curtain on the shadows that hide in plain sight. We are building a library of awareness here, a manual for the observant in a world that wants us to keep our eyes on the screen and off the hallway. Follow me on Instagram and rate the podcast 5 stars on Spotify. It helps more than you know. The world is a lot darker than your screen lets you believe, and your safety is a fragile agreement. We've seen the unblinking eyes and the hands in the rafters. We've decoded the cannibalistic ciphers and traced the legal ghosts. Now, it's up to you to secure your own perimeter. Take a high-powered flashlight and audit your space before you close your eyes. Don't wait for a to-do list to appear in your mail to start taking your privacy seriously. Your home should be a haven, not a habitat for an uninvited guest. The silent trap. They say winter is the season of peace, a time when the world tucks itself under a blanket of pristine white silence. But that silence? It's a lie. In reality, a blizzard is the perfect curtain for things that don't want to be seen. If you think your locked doors and double-paned glass are enough to keep the world out, you're dead wrong. Because when the power goes out and the temperature drops, the line between safety and a death trap disappears in seconds. Just ask Elias. I was 24, living in a farmhouse in rural Ohio that was isolated even on a good day. My parents were in Florida, leaving me to guard our patch of land against a predicted ice storm. By 8 p.m., the beauty of winter turned violent. The sleet didn't fall. It attacked, hitting the windows with a rhythmic clatter like gravel being hurled by a madman. The world outside transformed into a white void, erasing the tree line, the barn, and eventually, the road. Then, at 9:30 p.m., the heart of the house stopped. The TV screen flickered and died, and the steady hum of the furnace vanished. The silence that followed was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my eardrums. In a farmhouse, miles from the nearest neighbor, absolute darkness isn't just a lack of light. It's a vacuum. I fumbled for a heavy-duty flashlight in the kitchen junk drawer, my breath already forming small clouds in the rapidly cooling air. The snow outside was so thick it muffled every sound, making it feel like the rest of the world had simply ceased to exist. I sat at the kitchen island, the dim glow of my phone, the only thing keeping the shadows at bay. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed with a sharp, jarring vibration, a notification from my security app. Motion detected at the back door. My stomach did a slow roll. I opened the feed, but the Wi-Fi was down, forcing the app to struggle through a weak, grainy cellular signal. The screen was a chaotic mess of infrared static and swirling white flakes. I squinted at the small display, my heart hammering. There, standing on the edge of the wooden deck, was a dark, unidentifiable shape, a blob in the storm. I tapped the screen desperately to refresh the image, but the loading wheel just spun and spun. Then, the screen went black, camera offline. I was standing in a dark house, and someone or something was now invisible, just a few feet away from my sliding glass door. I reached for the door handle, my breath hitching as I realized I wasn't just alone in the dark anymore. The eye in the frost. The eye in the frost. I stood there in the kitchen, paralyzed, as the notification camera offline stared back at me like a death sentence. The farmhouse felt smaller now, the shadows stretching and leaning toward me from every corner. I knew I had locked the back door, I always did, but the cold seed of doubt had already sprouted in my gut. I had to be sure. I moved through the kitchen with the stealth of someone who didn't want to wake a sleeping giant, leaving my flashlight off. I didn't want to be a beacon in the dark. As I approached the sliding glass door, the temperature seemed to plummet with every step. I could feel the radiant cold bleeding through the double-paned glass, a sharp contrast to the stale, cooling air of the house. The humidity inside had met the freezing air outside, creating a thick, opaque wall of condensation and frost. It was a foggy gray rectangle that hid the world. I reached out, my fingers hovering just inches from the metal latch. Suddenly, the silence wasn't just quiet, it was expectant. Then, a pale hand slammed against the glass from the outside. I didn't just see it. I felt the vibration rattle my teeth. The skin was a sickly, translucent white, pressed so hard against the glass that the blood had been forced from the fingertips. I watched in absolute, cold-blooded horror as the fingers curled, their nails scratching against the frost with a sound like a violin string snapping. Slowly, with agonizing deliberation, the hand began to move. It wiped a slow, wet circle in the frost right at my eye level, and then an eye appeared. It was less than a foot from my face. It was a wide, unblinking, human eye, the pupil blown wide open and rimmed with a manic, crystalline light. It wasn't searching the room. It was locked onto mine. He knew exactly where I was standing. The face belonged to a man named Silas, though I didn't know his name then. He was a drifter, and through the clear circle in the glass, I could see he was wearing a wide, jagged, manic grin that didn't reach his eyes. I screamed. It was an involuntary, guttural sound that tore through my throat. I scrambled backward, my socks losing traction on the hardwood floor. I hit the ground hard, my hip throbbing, but I didn't stop. I found my feet and bolted for the hallway. Behind me, a massive thud shook the house. Silas had slammed his entire body weight against the sliding door, trying to force it off its tracks. I sprinted for the downstairs bathroom. It was the only room on the first floor with a solid oak door and, more importantly, no windows. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and twisted the lock. I wedged my body between the porcelain of the toilet and the vanity, my hand shaking so violently I nearly sent my phone skittering across the tile. I dialed 911. My voice was a jagged whisper. Please, there's someone in my house. He's trying to get in. The operator's voice was calm, but the news was devastating. The storm has jackknifed several trucks on the main road, Elias. Emergency services are at a standstill. It's going to be at least a 20-minute delay. Stay hidden. Stay on the line. 20 minutes. In this house, 20 minutes was an eternity. The banging at the back door stopped, replaced by a silence so profound I could hear the blood rushing through my ears. But it didn't last. A moment later, a thunderous crash echoed from the front of the house, the sound of shattered glass. He had smashed the living room window. I pressed my hands over my mouth to stifle the sound of my own breathing. Crunch, crunch. The heavy, rhythmic sound of boots stepping over glass shards moved through the living room. He wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. He was stomping, claiming the space. I heard a lamp topple over. Then, a voice drifted through the door, rough and gravelly, like someone who had spent a lifetime shouting into the wind. "Come on out, kid," Silas crooned. It was a taunting, sing-song melody that made my skin crawl. "It's freezing out there. I just want to get warm." The footsteps grew louder, moving into the hallway. The floorboards groaned under his weight. My heart was a drum in my chest, and I was sure he could hear it through the wood. The shadow of his feet cut across the sliver of light at the bottom of the bathroom door. He stopped. The doorknob turned. Slowly, methodically. It clicked against the lock. Back and forth. Then, silence. Suddenly, the door shuddered. Silas had thrown his shoulder into it. Splintering wood shrieked as the frame began to give. He hit it again, and I saw a cracked spiderweb through the center of the oak. "I know you're in there," he mumbled, his voice right on the other side of the wood. Just as he drew back for a third hit, the one I knew would shatter the door, the world changed. Through the small gap at the bottom of the door and the growing cracks in the wood, a chaotic strobe of blue and red lights began to pulse. The sirens were close, their chirps cutting through the howling wind outside. The pressure on the door vanished instantly. I heard Silas hiss a curse, "Damn it," and then the sound of him retreating, his heavy boots thudding back toward the living room as the police breached the house. They caught him in the kitchen, high on meth and carrying a serrated blade. Later, as I sat wrapped in a blanket in the back of a cruiser, a deputy showed me something that chilled me more than the storm ever could. Silas hadn't just appeared when I got that notification. The tracks in the fresh snow showed he had been standing on my back deck for over an hour, perfectly still, watching me through the frost. He had been waiting for the exact moment the power failed and the cameras went dark to make his move. I moved into the city shortly after that. I thought I had left the fear of the winter wilderness behind, but as I would soon learn, the cold has a way of following you, even into the most mundane parts of life. The memory of that night often resurfaces when the wind picks up, reminding me that some encounters leave a permanent chill in your bones, much like the strange experience I had years later while working a late shift delivery in a completely different town. The uninvited customer. The uninvited customer. The chilling realization that Silas had been watching from the frost for an hour stayed with me long after the police cleared the scene. It's funny how a single night can rewire your brain, making you hyper-aware of every shadow and every creak in the floorboards. But as much as I wanted to believe that was a once-in-a-lifetime anomaly, the world has a way of proving that the isolated incident is rarely as isolated as we hope. A few years later, in the dead of the Minnesota winter of 2023, I heard a story from a colleague named Julian that mirrored that same bone-deep dread, only this time, the predator didn't have a heartbeat. Julian was a veteran DoorDash driver, the kind of guy who knew every shortcut and back road in the county. He actually preferred working during the brutal February storms. Why? Because of the surge pricing. When the temperature drops to 30 below and the wind howls like a wounded animal, nobody wants to leave their house. That's when the delivery payouts triple. And for Julian, who was struggling to cover his rent that month, a blizzard was just a paycheck with a higher risk of frostbite. Around 10:45 p.m., on a particularly nasty Tuesday, Julian's phone buzzed with an order that felt like a gift from the gods. A local high-end steakhouse. A large order. The payout was nearly $40 for a trip that the GPS claimed was only 5 miles away. He accepted it before even looking at the destination. In his mind, $40 was a tank of gas and a warm meal for himself. He didn't care if he had to drive through a wall of white to get it. But as he followed the navigation away from the glowing streetlights of the town center and into the rural outskirts, the short drive began to feel like a journey into a void. The further Julian drove, the more the road disappeared under sheets of black ice and fresh drifts. By the time he reached the address, he was the only soul on the road. The house was a massive, 2-story colonial house, set so far back from the road it looked like it was trying to hide in the tree line. The driveway was at least 100 yards long, a steep, winding incline that hadn't been plowed in days. There was at least a foot of fresh snow covering the gravel. Julian looked at his low-clearance sedan and knew he wouldn't make it 10 feet up that hill without getting stuck. He tried calling the customer. No answer. He texted, explaining the situation. Silence. Frustrated, but determined not to lose that $40 payout, Julian grabbed the heavy paper bag which smelled of expensive ribeye and garlic butter and stepped out into the biting wind. Before he started the trek, he pulled up the delivery notes one last time to see if there was a gate code he'd missed. The instructions were oddly specific. Leave at front door. Do not knock or ring the bell. Dogs will bark. Do not look in the windows. Julian shrugged off the first 2 parts. Plenty of people had sleeping babies or neurotic pets, but the last line, do not look in the windows, sat heavy in his stomach. It wasn't an instruction. It was a warning. It felt less like a request for privacy and more like a command to ignore something that shouldn't be there. The walk up the driveway was a nightmare of frozen lungs and burning thighs. The wind was so sharp it felt like it was peeling the skin off his cheeks. As he approached the house, he realized it was vacant, or at least it looked that way. There were no lights on in the upstairs windows, no porch light to guide him, and no smoke curling from the chimney. It was a dark monolith against the gray sky. If it hadn't been for a single set of tire tracks that looked a few hours old, he would have assumed the GPS had led him to a ghost house. He climbed the front steps, which were treacherous with ice, and placed the steak dinner on the mat. He took the required photo for the app, the flash of his camera momentarily illuminating the peeling paint of the door. He turned to leave, but the warning from the app burned in his mind. Don't look in the windows. It's a psychological trap, isn't it? Tell someone not to do something, and it becomes the only thing they want to do. To the right of the door was a massive bay window, a giant sheet of glass that offered a panoramic view of the living room. Julian couldn't help himself. He shifted his eyes just a few inches to the right. The room inside was hollow. There was no furniture, no rugs, no family photos. It was just bare hardwood floors and shadows except for the very center of the room. Standing perfectly still in the middle of the empty space was a male mannequin wearing a sharp, gray business suit. It wasn't in a store window pose. Its arms were straight at its sides, its smooth, featureless plastic forehead tilted slightly down. It was facing the window. It was facing Julian. Julian's skin prickled. Maybe the owners were staging the house for a sale? Maybe it was some eccentric art piece? He tried to rationalize it, but the vibe was toxic. He turned away quickly, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm. He needed to get back to the safety of his car. He hit the bottom step too fast. His boot found a patch of black ice, and he went down hard, his elbow taking the brunt of the impact. Damn it, he hissed, rubbing his arm as he sat in the snow for maybe 5 or 6 seconds, trying to catch his breath and regain his bearings. He looked back at the house, half expecting a light to click on or a voice to ask if he was okay. The house remained dark, but when Julian's eyes traveled back to the bay window, His blood turned to slush. The mannequin wasn't in the center of the room anymore. It was now pressed directly against the glass of the bay window, looming over the porch. It was upright, its smooth plastic face inches from the pane, looking down at exactly where Julian had just fallen. There was no way a human could have moved that mannequin across 20 feet of an empty room in 5 seconds without making a sound. And yet, there it was, staring into the dark with its blank, eyeless face. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded Julian's system. He didn't wait for a second look. He bolted. He sprinted down that 100-yard driveway, his knees pumping through the deep snow. He didn't look back, but he swore he could feel the sensation of long, cold fingers brushing against the hood of his jacket. He reached his car, fumbled the keys into the ignition, and tore out of there so fast he nearly ended up in a ditch. He called DoorDash support, his voice shaking as he reported an unsafe delivery environment. He didn't mention the mannequin. He knew how insane it sounded, so he just blamed the ice and the lack of lighting. A few days later, curiosity got the better of him. He drove past the property during the daylight hours. A weathered for sale sign stood at the end of the driveway, looking like it had been there for a decade. When he got home, he checked the address on Zillow. The listing confirmed his worst fears. The house had been vacant and on the market for over 14 months. The interior photos showed the exact living room he had seen. Empty, cold, and devoid of any gray-suited mannequins. Julian never took another delivery on that side of town. He realized that sometimes, when a customer tells you not to look, it's because they don't want you to see who or what is actually paying for the meal, whether it's a person standing in the shadows or a figure that moves when you blink. The winter has a strange way of making us question the reality of what we see. It makes you wonder what else is hiding in the whiteout, just waiting for a car to stall or a traveler to lose their way. Much like the encounter on the Wyoming interstate that redefined the meaning of cold. Would you like me to proceed to the next section, which explores a terrifying encounter during a highway whiteout? The man in the t-shirt. The man in the t-shirt. That sense of being watched by something unmoving and plastic is enough to make anyone swear off night shifts forever. It's one thing to face a threat you can explain, like a locked door or a broken security camera, but it is entirely another to witness something that defies the very laws of biology and physics. While Julian's encounter at the abandoned colonial house left him questioning his sanity, my own brush with the inexplicable happened in the middle of a crowded highway, proving that even a line of hundreds of people can feel like a lonely graveyard when the cold starts to play tricks on your soul. It was December, and I was driving along Interstate 80 through the desolate stretches of Wyoming. I was desperate to get home for the holidays, pushing through the fatigue, but the sky had other plans. What started as a few innocent flakes quickly spiraled into a total whiteout. If you've never experienced a Wyoming blizzard, imagine being wrapped in a thick, vibrating sheet of white wool. You can't see the hood of your car, the taillights in front of you, or even the ground. Everything came to a screeching halt. A jackknifed semi about a mile ahead had blocked both lanes, and within minutes, the interstate turned into a parking lot. At first, there was a sense of communal frustration, engines idling, the occasional honk, but as the hours ticked by and the snow began to bury the tires, the highway fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. Most people turned off their lights and engines to conserve fuel, transforming the road into a literal graveyard of buried vehicles. By midnight, I had been sitting in the same spot for 4 hours. The interior of my car was a refrigerator. I had a routine. Run the heat for 10 minutes, then kill the engine for 45. I was wearing a heavy parka, wool socks, and gloves, yet my teeth were still chattering. I looked to my right and noticed a rusted, dark green sedan, an older Honda, maybe completely caked in frost. I hadn't seen its exhaust pipe puff once. I assumed the driver was either incredibly well prepared with blankets or, more likely, their battery had died, and they were huddling in the dark, praying for morning. Then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the silence broke. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the driver's door of that green sedan creak open. I sat up, my heart skipping a beat. The wind outside was screaming at 30 miles per hour, and the digital thermometer on my dash read negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. No human being survives long in that without gear, but as the man stepped out into the shin-deep snow, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. He wasn't wearing a coat. He wasn't wearing a hat. He was dressed in a faded graphic t-shirt, thin jeans, and canvas sneakers. I watched, paralyzed by a mix of confusion and mounting dread. I thought he was having a medical emergency, maybe paradoxical undressing from hypothermia, but his movements weren't erratic or panicked. He didn't look like a man freezing to death. He walked toward the car in front of him, a large SUV, with a casual, methodical gait. He reached out and tried the door handle. It was locked. He didn't knock. He didn't shout for help. He just moved to the next car, a pickup truck, and tried that handle too. He was the stroller, a man walking through a sub-zero blizzard as if he were taking a light evening walk through a shopping mall. He wasn't hunched against the wind. He wasn't shivering. After checking 3 cars, he turned around and began walking toward me. My survival instinct screamed. I lunged for my door lock, pressing it down even though it was already engaged. He stopped right at my driver's side window. The snow was swirling violently around him, but the glow from my dashboard lights illuminated his face with terrifying clarity. He was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a wide, tooth-filled grin. Too many teeth. Too much gum that looked like it had been carved into his face with a knife. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and vacant. He lifted a piece of cardboard he had been carrying. It looked like the greasy lid of a pizza box. Written on it in thick, shaky black marker were the words, "Let me in. I'm cold." I stared at the sign, then at his skin. This is the detail that still keeps me awake. He wasn't shivering. At 10 degrees below zero, exposed skin turns blue or pale within minutes. His skin looked perfectly normal. Warm, even. He tapped on my glass with a single finger, his eyes locked onto mine, that unnatural grin never wavering. "No," I mouthed, my voice trapped in my throat. "Go away." He didn't get angry. He didn't plead. He just tilted his head, looking at me like an interesting specimen in a jar. He reached down and pulled my door handle. Click. The lock held. He let go, lowered his sign, and without a hint of urgency, turned around and walked back to the green sedan. He got in and shut the door. I grabbed the tire iron from under my seat and sat there, vibrating with adrenaline, staring at that rusted Honda for the rest of the night. I never saw the door open again. I never saw a flicker of a dome light. When the sun finally rose at 7 a.m., the plows managed to break through. A highway patrol officer began walking down the line of cars to check for casualties. When he reached me, I rolled down my window, my hands still shaking. "Officer," I said, pointing to the green Honda. "The guy in that car, he's dangerous. He was trying to get into my car at 2 a.m. in a t-shirt." The officer looked at the sedan. It was almost entirely buried now, a white mound on the shoulder. He frowned and walked over, wiping the snow from the glass. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. He opened the door and peered inside. I leaned out of my window, expecting to see the stroller sitting there with his pizza box. "There's nobody in here," the officer called back. "No keys either." My stomach dropped. I insisted I had watched him get back into the car. The officer checked the VIN in the glove box, and 10 minutes later, he returned to my window with a grim expression. "This was a stolen vehicle," he said. "Reported taken from a pizza delivery driver in Omaha 3 days ago. Whoever took it must have run it out of gas and ditched it right as the traffic stopped." "But I saw him," I argued. "He was right there." The officer looked at the pristine, undisturbed snow surrounding the sedan. "If someone was out here in a t-shirt last night, they didn't walk far. But there's no body, and there are no tracks leading away from the car other than yours." The stroller had vanished into the whiteout, leaving nothing behind but the memory of a grin and a sign that begged for a warmth he didn't seem to need. It makes you realize that in the heart of a storm, the most dangerous thing isn't the cold itself, it's whatever has learned to live inside it. The highway patrol eventually towed the green sedan, but the mystery of where that man went, or what he actually was, remains buried in the Wyoming snow. It's a chilling reminder that our sense of security is often just a thin pane of glass. But as we move from the frozen isolation of the road into the places we call home, we have to ask ourselves, are we any safer behind 4 walls? Would you like me to move on to the final part of our journey, where we look at how these echoes of the past can manifest in our own homes? The cold never forgets. The cold never forgets. while the empty green sedan and the missing tracks left the highway patrol baffled. For those of us who have stared into the unblinking eyes of the impossible, the mystery isn't about where he went. It's about what he was. This brings us to a chilling realization. Winter isn't just a season of festivities and frost. It is a sprawling winter veil that masks the predatory and the paranormal alike. The psychological scars left on survivors like Sarah, Travis, or Julian aren't merely memories. They're a lingering fear that transforms every snowfall into a potential nightmare. We often think of the cold as a physical adversary, something to be defeated with a heavy coat or a roaring fire. But these stories suggest something far more sinister. The man in the t-shirt, standing comfortably in a negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit blizzard, proves that the most terrifying entities don't fear the elements. They inhabit them. Winter provides the perfect environment for isolation, muffling our screams with thick snow and blinding our vision with whiteouts. It turns our very homes and vehicles into fragile cages. The hard truth is that we are most vulnerable when we feel tucked in. We rely on our smart cameras, our double-paned glass, and our deadbolts. Yet, as we've seen, a camera can go offline at the exact moment a hand touches the glass. A deadbolt is only as strong as the frame it sits in. And a ground floor window? That's nothing more than a front row seat for whatever is prowling in the dark. Take this as a final, practical warning. Check your unlocked doors. Don't ignore the weird specific instructions in a delivery app. And if you ever see a figure standing in the middle of a storm, unbothered by the wind that should be freezing their blood, do not look for the logic in it. Just run. As the wind begins to howl outside your own home tonight, I have to ask, will you be brave enough to look out your window during the next snowfall? Or will you keep the curtains drawn, fearing that something might be looking back, waiting for the lights to flicker out? The cold never forgets a face, and it certainly never forgets an open invitation. If you've ever had a brush with the unseen during the dead of winter, share your story in the comments below. We're all just looking for a way to stay warm, aren't we?